folks. Hello. Oh, there we go. Okay. Sorry, we're having some technical difficulties over here. We're now live. So, sorry, Gardner. We're live. I was like,
no
crap, let's just go. And let me make sure that my thing over here is mute. So, it's been a day.
You got it. You got it. No problem. By the way, I have to tell you, I'm sorry. This is not Gardner. This is... Hi, I'm Gil Bates, and I just want to make sure that everybody knows that the big intention here is that if we get the right amount of vaccines, we can probably wipe out 110% of the population. So that's what we're working for and working towards. So I hope we can have a great conversation, and all of your watchers, or viewers and listeners will use our own technology. And of course, don't think about regulatory capture in any way whatsoever, and don't think about corruption that could be occurring within the vaccine industry. Thanks. Oh, by the way, by saying vaccine industry, does that mean you're going to get, demonetized?
Oh, well, so honestly,
yeah.
I signed into my channel last night, and all of a sudden there were a bunch of yellow demonetized dollar signs where previously there had been none. So click the links and check out the partners, guys.
Unbelievable. Gary Franchi was talking about that, and you might have seen some of the videos that Gary was putting up over the Next News Network. He's like, hey, I just don't know what's going on, and of course, he's really worked hard. You've worked hard to build things up. It just blows my mind how censorious people can get. It's just nuts. It's absolutely crazy. It's like we're living in V. It's pick whichever V you want. The V TV series where they're dropping rats like Pez, or what? Be the film based on the graphic novel.
Well, I'm pretty sure it's because I covered Michigan and was like, woohoo, boogaloo. I'm pretty sure that's what happened.
I was really and good for those guys to be out there. And here a little something for all the people who are out there. Remember when I put this in my first video just last night. The people who are critical of those folks who make reference to early Nazi Germany, and again, there's a little flag. YouTube's gonna hate that one too. But if you look at the process of what the National Socialists did in Germany before they started to send people to the camps, this is exactly the same process.
Oh, yeah.
It's just mind-blowing to think. They shut down businesses. And I asked somebody early on, I said, look, when the FDR administration caged Japanese Americans and shut down their businesses, before this all happened, you left-winger, you would have been totally bleeding heart and said, absolutely, that was a terrible thing. Right, it was. It was very bad. It should not have happened. I'm, of course, a voluntarist. So anything that is requiring taxation to do it is bad. And then it just gets worse from there, right?
Mm-hmm.
So clearly, these people being thrown into jails in some sort of prison and their livelihoods being taken was bad. And yet now the left-wingers are saying, oh, this is totally different.
Yep.
This is for the survival of our country.
Yep.
I'm like, but that's what they said.
Well, and the irony of people saying like, oh, Trump's a tyrant, and then now they've shut everything down and gone full tyrant, and now that the economy is crashing, they're turning around and blaming Trump, even though Trump wasn't actually the one that shut anything down.
I know, he wasn't a tyrant enough, evidently, And the thing that gets me too about this, Liberty Doll, is that the number of people I run into, I'll be walking in the stores and I'll talk to a few folks and I'll say, yeah, this is a complete breach of the First Amendment, right of free association. It's a breach of the Fourth Amendment because, of course, they are invading people's privacy. They're getting their medical records in many cases. Of course, Governor Whitmer had a big problem where she was going to sign on with a company to collect people's medical data. And that goes back to 1996. Yeah, that goes back to the HIPAA Act, where they gave it that Orwellian title of privacy in there for HIPAA. Of course, they didn't actually institute it until Obamacare was instituted, but it was floating around and nobody questioned. They said, isn't there supposed to be this Fourth Amendment that prevents the government from getting my medical data without a judge issuing a warrant? And again, being a voluntarist, I don't even think that that is sufficient. And of course, it requires taxation to back the whole system up.
Right.
But if you're going to go with a fallback, at least look to the Constitution and say there are supposed to be some barriers. Why bother writing them down if you're not going to bother to actually pay attention to them? I mean, Aristotle would be flipping his wig. It's nuts. It's absolutely, and your observation, Liberty Doll, about how originally they were charging Trump with being a fascist, and of course Antifa's running around clubbing people in the name of
and with bike locks, With bike locks,
I know, it's insane. And then they don't even look into the history of where Antifa came from. It was a creation of Stalin's Soviet Union to try to infiltrate the National Socialists and to win them over to the world socialist concept. It was just one form of socialism trying to eke into another form of socialism. So it has nothing to do with real freedom in any way whatsoever. It's all collectivist polis. It's just crazy. And yet these people are out accusing Donald Trump of being a fascist. So you sit there and you say, hey, I've got examples of Hamilton, Ontario, where the cops walk into a voluntarist house and they take them to a mental psych ward.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. It's crazy. You got these examples coming out of Texas where the woman just opens up her doors to say, would you like to come in and have a haircut? The gentleman in Michigan who's going up against Gretchen, you know, Queen Goddess Gretchen. I don't know how much she can wash her hands, but that blood's not going to come off, metaphorically speaking. It's amazing to think about this. Yeah, you know, out damn spot, you know, that they are totally in favor of this. And when they say that they're in favor of these things, they say, well, we're trying to protect people. And of course, that all goes towards what I think, and philosophically, I hope folks will look into this stuff. But as a person who believes in real freedom, I recognize that the United States system, the Constitution, is based on Lockean natural rights theory, where John Locke and Thomas Jefferson picked this up from him, and Locke picked it up from people like Thomas Aquinas and so on. Aquinas was one of the first people, Aristotle and Plato also spoke about this, but they talked about civil disobedience. Yeah. And Aquinas was one of the first people to differentiate, and he came up with that expression, lex mala, lex nulla. Bad law is no law. And my dad used to say that to me, and I never really understood. I would ask him, and he goes, you just look into it. And of course, my dad has copies of Human Action by von Mises that he literally has annotated, and he has columns. He did that with all of his books. And then he passed them on to me. So I've got, Hayek and Henry Hazlitt and Bastiat.
Man, so you're like second generation on the Liberty train. That's pretty cool.
It's pretty cool. Yeah, he was sort of a proto-libertarian, and it was wild. In fact, the first article I ever got published was for the Foundation for Economic Education in the Freeman magazine, which of course was published, way, way, way back, and has always been a great radical, to the root radical magazine about free markets. And it was fascinating. Albert J. Nock was one of the editors years ago. And when I got it published, Sheldon Richman was the editor there, and I was so proud because it was my first article getting published, and my dad had had a subscription to it for so long. And I went up to my dad. I was like, "Dad, check it out," and I was like, "Yeah, that's so cool." I was really happy about that. So, but it's interesting because when you look at these actions from these people who are engaging in civil disobedience, it goes right back to Thomas Aquinas. This is thousands of years of history happening right now in the United States. And you've got these people who are so indoctrinated in postmodernism and social justice warriorism, they don't understand individual rights. And this, unfortunately, also stems a little bit from John Locke and Thomas Aquinas. Aquinas said, well, you can, and this goes back actually to Socrates, in the Credo, Socrates is sentenced to death. Because he's been stirring up the pot and so on. And Socrates and Plato were way off on their concept of the republic, if that was Socrates' idea, because we don't really know what Socrates said. Plato told us what Socrates said. So Plato's Republic tells us all about this ridiculous, centrally planned system. And And then Socrates supposedly was put to death because, well, he was ordered to either take hemlock or he would be put to death. So he chose the hemlock. And Crito comes up to him and he says, you know, Saki, what's going on, buddy? Like, get out of here, man. You've been talking about how you can protest bad laws and you don't have to abide by these things. So why don't you leave? Get out. And he goes, oh, no. The state is like our parent.
No.
Oh, no, Socrates.
No.
See, it's like,
don't do it.
Yeah, you know, and they put out, it's funny because I tell students, I say, look, just because there are like marble busts of these guys doesn't mean that they were the be all and end all. They just were people, they had ideas, and they're good to compare to what you think. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you can agree or have better ideas. There have been a lot of people with a lot of better ideas, but you test, you know? So Socrates says, oh, no, I can go up against bad decisions by the government, but now I have to accept the punishment. It's like, but the punishment is just another decision of the government. So like Crito never asks him about that. Crito never was like, well, dude, you're being inconsistent. Like, why don't you just say this is another dumb idea of the government and screw them, right? I'm going to do what I want. But no, instead he drinks his hemlock shake, and unfortunately, I guess it wasn't FDA or brought to by Bill Gates, so it wasn't safe, and he died. And so,
you know, when I took my philosophy classes at my state university, I never learned any of this.
Well, you know,
I wonder why.
There you go. And oh, by the way, I have to compliment. I'm going to show you something here. And for the viewers, and thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. And I just want to compliment Liberty Doll. I just want to let you know that, first of all, your connection, as we were talking a little bit beforehand, everybody, I have had a few instances where I've been pretty sick recently. And so I've been sort of lying in bed and stuff. And I was a fan of Liberty Doll a long time ago. And our friend Andy put us in touch with each other.
Hi,
like,
Andy.
He goes, yeah. He's like, oh, you know, Liberty Doll wants to reach me. I was like, Liberty Doll wants to reach me. That's so cool. And, you know, I used to do the podcast, Liberty Conspiracy Podcast. I had to stop that for a little while because I was getting sick. And I was co-host on Free Talk Live with Ian and Mark a lot. And so now I do things for MRC TV, which is sort of a paleo-conservative group in Washington, D.C., and they're great. And there are some areas where we agree, you know, completely. There are some where we don't quite agree. And there are some where, for example, they're much more in favor of, you know, really strong border control and stuff. And I point out that if you're supposedly a constitutionalist, naturalization is a constitutional power, but immigration is actually left to the states, as Jefferson said in one of the Kentucky resolutions in 1798. So it's very clear. I mean, there's a whole logical argument. I'm going to actually publish something on that soon. But it's supposed to be a state purview. But anyway, many years ago, I was also very sick, and I picked up a series of cassettes by this company called Knowledge Products.
Oh.
And this is where I learned. So when you talk about like your college, you know, your college stuff, Nikki, this is a lot of what I learned came from these products, mm-hmm. Knowledge Products. They're cassettes. Sometimes they're out there on YouTube. People put out pieces and stuff like that. And what's interesting is these were written by some pretty hardcore libertarians. And I got it through the Laissez-Faire book catalog from years ago. There used to be a bookstore in New York called Laissez-Faire Books. And the narrator of these audios is Charlton Heston.
Nuh-uh. That is so cool.
Oh, yeah, and I hope you don't mind me taking this opportunity, Nikki, as I thank you, just to thank Charlton Heston, and also, you know, if his family ever hears this. On a personal note, in the 90s, I was having some really weird things going on with my immune system, and I kept getting injured, and at a certain point I was like trying to crawl up the stairs, and my legs were getting weird. I kept tearing things, so I would do physical therapy and I'd tear something else. Then they found out that my immune system was elevated. I had an elevated lymphocyte macrophage response, T cell response, so they actually gave me hydroxychloroquine in the 90s to lower my immune system. It works on a particular chemical chain called interleukin-2. And a lot of people with lupus take this and so on. And my dad had to take that stuff in World War II to stop malaria, and it turns your fingernails yellow, and, you know, yeah.
Sounds
so while
cute.
I was there, yeah, really, you know. So yeah, while I was there doing PT, and they lowered my immune response and stuff, and I started getting better, and that was like amazing. I got these cassettes, and I would listen to them, and they really took the place of a lot of what I missed in college, and it was great. And I have to say, years later, Nikki, Charlton Heston, whom I loved anyway, because he was pro-freedom, you know, he stood up for the Second Amendment, as you know, as far as the NRA was going. They weren't quite as weak then, I think partially because of him. But I loved Planet of the Apes, and so I wrote to him around 19. Oh yeah. Rod Serling wrote the bulk of the script, and I was a big fan of Rod Serling, and so I wrote to Mr. Heston because Bud Light had a series of commercials, and the commercials, well, just to let you know, these tapes, the Knowledge Products tapes, they feature Charlton Heston, and he will say, let's say they're talking about Immanuel Kant, right? And he'll say, he'll give sort of a little intro bit, and he'll say, the crux of Kant's argument was subjectivity. We could not get around our own subjective views. And you'd hear a guy doing, you know, Kant's accent, and he's like, the problem with our existence is, that's more French, the problem with our existence is the subjective problem, right? Okay. Then they would come back, and he'd say that, and he would recap it, and he'd say, Kant felt that subjectivity, blah, blah, blah. Okay. So then what's fascinating is these ads for Bud Light, they actually were the same pattern.
Oh,
so like,
that's so weird.
Charlton Heston on the radio. So Charlton Heston's doing this thing. He goes, let's see how one man made his night a Bud Light night. And the guy would say, I was in a bar, and they intentionally had Heston like jump in strong. He was like, he was in a bar. And the guy sort of freaked out. He's like, yeah, so I grabbed a seat. He grabbed his seat. He goes, for the record, I said I grabbed a seat. And so Heston's like, okay, go on. So I was amazed. So I wrote to Charlton Heston, and I said, hey, you know, I know the 30th anniversary of Planet of the Apes is coming up. I'd love to write an article. If you'd ever be willing to do an interview, maybe publish it in Starlog or something that was around then for, you know, sci-fi fans and stuff. And it was probably around 95 that I wrote to him. And so I was like, you know, I sent him some articles. I sent him a copy of The Law by Frederick Bastiat, that great pamphlet of the law. And you know, I thanked him, and I mentioned, you know, these commercials remind me of the Knowledge Products tapes, you know, and I learned so much. Literally less than 2 weeks later, I got a letter typed by him, not by some secretary or anything. Yep, with his home address on the envelope. And I don't even know how I got it to him. I think I sent it to him through his advertising agency. I mean, not that, his creative artist agency. So he wrote back and he goes, thank you so much for writing to me. I'd love to do an interview. That's one of my favorite films. Mr. Serling's script is amazing, so on and so forth. I will be away for the next year if you can wait, because I'm going to be going around the world with my son, and we'll be in the Holy Land shooting a documentary on the Bible, which, by the way, is a great documentary. And so he said, thank you so much for the articles. I sent him some stuff that I had written. And he said, you know, I never thought about it, but I bet you're right. I bet the writers on those ads knew about them. And those are very esoteric. There aren't a lot of people who have those. And he said, I bet they knew about them, because you're right. I never thought of it, but that's really funny. You should bring it up.
Oh,
then
that's
he said,
funny.
and finally, thank you for that copy of The Law. You're right. It's one of the best. I usually reread it every few years.
Wow.
So this is so Mr. Heston was a guy who
bonus
not
points.
Only, exactly, Nikki. He read it, but he was into it. It wasn't just that he got hired to be the narrator. He was into this stuff. The Ten Commandments, he clearly was into the deep philosophy. And that goes towards getting back to the civil disobedience and Locke thing. The problem that many people have is that in the United States is that the nuggets of this government overreach were there going back to 1670 with John Locke and Thomas Aquinas. So Thomas Aquinas had that expression that my dad would say, lex mala, lex nulla, bad law is no law. he would say you could be civilly disobedient up to the point of doing something violent, and then you couldn't do that. Locke took it a step further, and he said, no, you can engage in violent revolution. And Jefferson took it a step further than that. If you read the Declaration of Independence, he not only mentions that you can overthrow a government, he later says you have a duty to overthrow the government. Now, unfortunately, he said replace it with another if you want to, right? Unfortunately, that ties into Locke. See, the problem with Locke, as you know, as a voluntarist, is that John Locke basically said out of the state of nature, where everybody is free to do what they want, in order to ensure their lives and their property, men form groups and they form a government. Now, that assumes that somehow the government is formed by everybody, which would make it not a state, but a business. People voluntarily engaging in something and not forcing anybody. The state is involuntary.
Right.
The state forces people. That's the difference between society and the state. Society you can choose, and you can pay if you want to, and it lets us show what we prefer so that the best things rise to the top and people compete. That's free market society. Government is an imposition. It is a seizure of monopolistic powers over violent use of force. And Locke thought that, well, and here's the tautology, in order to protect your property, the state must exist. But the only way for the state to exist is by having access to your property anytime it wants. So you've got basically a shakedown system. And so they tried to guard against this with the Constitution. First, I think a better system would have been the Articles of Confederation, with much more decentralization so that people could escape bad systems. But they enlarged it. The larger the system, the more dangerous it is, the more people it can hurt, the less addressable it is. And they tried with the Constitution to put these restrictions in, but nobody pays any attention to these restrictions. So you've got these people, exactly. So you've got these people who are in various states. The governor of New Jersey is asked by Tucker Carlson, oh, well, you know, Tucker, I wasn't really thinking about the Bill of Rights. It's above my pay grade. It's like, dude, are you freaking kidding me? That's how you're getting your payment, you know? And it's not even a job, as I mentioned in my first Liberty Conspiracy video. It's not a job because a job is something that involves real hiring. This is
and accountability.
You wouldn't call a gangster. Yeah, you wouldn't call a mafia member doing his job, right? That's not his job. A thief isn't doing a job, right? And this guy is not asking for anybody's money. He's taking their money at the force of the government gun. So I'm amazed by some of these people who don't realize that when we look at the Constitution, even at that level, they have an amendment process and they have the rules. If people don't like the rules and they think that things should be operating by the government and they're voting for the Senate and the House and all these different offices that have been created by the Constitution, well, the least they could do is be consistent and say, hey, you know what? This kind of infringes on the Fourth Amendment. Oh, this infringes on the Fifth Amendment. There's no due process. People are being locked in their homes. Oh, yeah, this infringes on the contract clause because we're shutting down businesses and they might have already had pre-existing contracts. And the contract clause forbids anyone in state legislatures or state government from breaching already existing contracts. It's like, duh, this stuff is so simple. It's like manifestly in front of your face. All you have to do is read the Constitution, and they don't bother.
Nope.
So anyway, you're an oasis. You're one of the few people out there. You know, you and Mike. I want to compliment you, by the way. I'm just so excited to be here. I want to compliment you having Mike on from 10th Amendment Center, Jacob Hornberger. The way you are so good to talk about guns and gadgets. The way you had Foe.
Yes.
You were on with Paul. That was awesome. So there's a terrific network of people, and you know, great think tanks, as I mentioned, the Foundation for Economic Education, the Mises Institute, the Independent Institute. All these organizations and people are sort of, you know, in the underground, but we know each other. And I just want to thank you because you might not have known me, but I was watching you, and you really helped me pull through when I was real sick, and I really appreciate that.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. I'm always shocked when I find out that people watch my channel. It's like, oh yeah, okay, like I know it says I have like 175,000 subscribers or whatever and however many views, but I'm always like, wait, people actually watch this?
Yeah, it's a big deal. When the first year I was teaching, one of my students said, you should watch, there's a guy named Stefan Molyneux. I was like, oh yeah, I know Steph. And they're like, you do? I'm like, yeah, I was on a panel with Steph a couple years ago at a Pork Fest, and they're like, you know Stefan Molyneux? I'm like, yeah, duh. Like these are small circles, and you are.
No, I don't actually know any of those people. I hide under my rock and just don't interact with people.
Yeah, it's like Madagascar. You didn't see anything.
Well, the people that I do know, I've had some really strange stories where it's like, I don't know. There was an incident where one person in the Liberty circles who's a celibritarian who shall not be named.
Did you say celibritarian?
Yeah, a celibritarian. That's awesome. One day I was like, hey, do you want to come on my show? And it was even before I did like these live streams. I would just do interviews. And he was like, oh yeah, sure. And I had him on and we did a Skype thing. And then it was never released because the footage was just awful. I didn't have the bandwidth for it. And then he was like trying to hit me up and like give me his phone number. And I totally thought that it was for networking. It was not, because I am apparently naive.
Well, and I think that's part of the drawback of, it's people obviously know you're married if they watch. You're very smart, and I just, especially, as you go through things as a single guy. Who's a libertarian, hardcore libertarian, you always hope that you're going to be able to meet someone who agrees with your principles, agrees with your ideals, and I'm sure when people see you, they just be like, "Wow, this is great."
Well, yeah, but I mean, take it a next step further. When we met at the convention, his girlfriend was trying to hit on my husband, so it was a really bizarre thing, and I was like, ah.
Oh no, not good. That's how you cause dissension in the ranks. I've become very, very humble, especially because I've been so sick. Like it was pretty funny, Nikki, when because I write fiction and stuff, and I should mention. Oh, by the way, if anybody's looking for my fiction, it's I have a novel that's going to be coming out soon. So that's called T-Miser, and that's actually based on something that I started in college, and it's the story. I'll tell you about it later. But if you can imagine, 1984 meets Repo Man, that's what it is. Meets Brazil, maybe. It's like punk rock against the state, happens in 1988 as a bunch of punkers become revolutionaries against Mike Dukakis, the governor of Massachusetts. And they realize that the T is an evil underground empire.
Oh, you told me about this a little bit before. Yeah. Is this where you were like leaving copies of like parts of it on the T?
Yeah. And we used to perform live. Like I convinced my friends. We did like little films and stuff because I went to film school at BU, and we used to hang out in Kenmore Square at the punk clubs like the Rat and stuff like that. We used to see a lot of bands. And first I had a fake ID so I could go in because I wasn't 21. And then BU found out and they almost expelled me. So that wasn't too cool. But it was great. Like the first band I saw was the Prime Movers, and they were awesome. And it was, it was right downtown, the Rat. It was so cool. But it was funny because we realized that the T was just awful. And we're like, why would anybody ride this thing? This is just the worst.
And it still has not improved.
And because you're from Massachusetts, everybody hates it. I'm like, why would anybody ride this thing? It never gets you there on time.
Nope.
In the wintertime, they'll have like 5 trains go by, and they just ding at you while you're waiting out there, like, waiting to get picked up. And then in the summertime, they pack it full, and it's not air conditioned.
No.
And it's nuts. Yeah, and this stinks. It smells so bad.
It's the worst thing I've ever smelled in my life.
Oh, yeah. It is the worst. So I realized, Nikki, that stuff is a gas. It's a gas to placate people so they won't realize how bad it really is. And then I started to think, wait a minute. I think a lot of these people you see like nodding off with their heads against the glass, like, you know, and it's sort of drooling along. This, you know, sort of reminds you like, you know, hardcore statists. But anyway, I realized.
And here I was thinking it was just heroin.
Yeah, really. You know, still join Antifa. It'll be fine. So anyway, or as I said, Repo Man, she's the rock. But anyway, so we started to realize, I'm like, I think they just got too much gas. And, you know, and we would hear like the announcers on the microphones, you know, when you're coming up to the thing, they had that Boston accent. People would be like, Park Street, change to the red line, Kenmore. Yeah. Like what? Like adding syllables, Kenmore, you know? Like, oh, this is so bad. So it's like, I think those guys used to just be riders in 3-piece suits going, I think they were like business people, but they got so much gas. The T's got them. They got them. So we built this whole like mythology, and we would actually have guys, and we'd set it up where in the stations, we'd have one guy get on one door, and I would get on with my army boots, my long trench coat, and a T symbol with the T thing crossed out. And I'd walk up like we didn't know each other, and I'd talk just loud enough so that the people could hear us. And I go, hey, dude. And he'd be like, yeah. I was like, yeah, you ride the T a lot, man? And he'd be like, yeah, I gotta get to work. Yeah. You might not want to do that, dude. And then he'd explain the whole thing about how it's this evil underground thing that's gonna suck out your, you know, your identity and all that stuff. And you know, now we just have, you know, we have Google to do that. But anyway, so we would do it just loud enough. And as the guy told about his conspiracy theory and stuff like that, he would do it just loud enough. The dude listening would be like, yeah, you know, that makes a lot of sense. Like he would buy into the whole thing. And then in the end, he'd be like, yeah, down with the T. And he'd jump off the tray and he'd go nuts. So anyway, we used to do that, and I wanted to turn in, and I started the novel like 1988, and then I got involved with script writing and stuff like that, and so I just put it aside, and I was like, you know, now I have 3 novellas that are published that are out there on Amazon, folks, if you want to look for them, and everything is interconnected. So if you get one, you'll see it forms. Yeah, it's a giant mosaic that at first it's going to look like it's sort of like a cosmic horror sort of thing meets science fiction sort of stuff or whatever. But in the end, it has much deeper roots than cosmicism. It has stuff about logos, stuff about the creation of the universe, God, and true evil and individual liberty. So the themes are all in there, but then it starts to really fit together. And hopefully I'm going to pull the rug out from under some of the atheists out there who might think that cosmic horror is super scary. I don't think cosmic horror is super scary in particular. I think that real evil and the destruction of human will is really scary. That's what I think is scary. So anyway, so Team Iser was supposed to come out, but it's been put off a little bit because of course, the Cowabunga 19 crackdowns.
Oh, I'm gonna call it that now. That's awesome.
Cowabunga. It's just, maybe I can get Gretchen Whitmer to sign a copy or something. Get Mike Dukakis. You know? Anyway, yeah.
Well, so I mean, speaking of like everything going on in Michigan and Wisconsin, it's interesting because, like, you know, they're right next to each other and they're having such polar opposite reactions to this whole thing, and I'm pleasantly surprised with the way that some of it is going. Actually, I mean, we have Wisconsin where the state Republicans actually filed a lawsuit and got it in front of the state Supreme Court that the lockdowns are unconstitutional, which is amazing and not what I would expect from career politicians. And then in Michigan, we have everything that's going on there, and like the protests and everything, And the protests now are at the point that this week, the state Congress actually ended their session early and closed down the government until Tuesday. But then I was reading some articles about it, and like the media they're actually calling these protesters combatants. It was in the Detroit Free News or something. They're using the word combatant to describe the protesters.
Are you kidding me?
I was shocked. I was absolutely shocked when I read it.
I mean, the propagandists out there, if they had been living in 1775, they clearly would have been writing for King George III.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I mean, everybody recognizes this. The concept of natural rights, depicting people who are in militia groups, or even people who aren't in militia groups, whatever, people who show up with their arms to say that they're there to intimidate. No, they're there to show you that they have a right to self-defense.
Yep.
And by the way, as the saying goes, when seconds count, the police are just minutes away. You know, I mean, it's just absurd. The demonization of these people. And it goes all the way to the point of out in California, in Fresno, they sent the health inspectors. And this is something that I think generation after generation, you get this normalcy bias, obviously. You know, it's the boiling frog situation where, if you even question the idea of a health inspector, well, what is the precept or the concept of the health inspector? What is the foundational basis of that? The foundational basis of that is this private property, this private establishment, which isn't pulling anybody in, it's not kidnapping anyone, is free to open the doors and invite people in, just like the churches that were getting excoriated by leftists. They're asking people, if you want to come in, we'll serve you. They're not kidnapping them. Now, instead, what you have are two blue uniformed people approach this Fresno restaurant called the Waffle Shop, and people are waiting in line, and the owner has said, look, we're going to admit people based on certain criteria that I have. It's his property.
Yep.
And he says, I want people, you know, we're going to not have as many seats open, so just wait out in line. Those people outside have set up their own voluntary system, spontaneously coming up with a line system, respecting those people who arrived earlier. And, you know, it's a first claim. And that goes way back to ancient man. You know, I mean, it's a very simple syllogism, right? Then these two people show up and they want to get inside. And they are, of course, officials.
Of course.
And they say, we can go in. And these people say, no, you wait just like everybody else. And who are you? And, of course, they walk away. And soon they show up with a man with a badge and a gun a taser, claiming, and a blue costume, claiming that I, as an individual from this other group of individuals, have a prerogative, the power to supersede all of your agreed to voluntary agreements and just bargain. And if you get in my way, I will, and which he did, put cuffs on you.
Wow.
And take you to a car. So he got a guy who was a Vietnam vet, probably in his 70s. And first he bumped into or shoved a woman. And she's like, what? And then they're all standing in front of the door, not letting the cop in. Now, the left-wing people would see that as somehow terrible, antisocial.
Right.
But we know that society and the state aren't the same thing. The antisocial one there was the officer coming from the state to invade what these people socially had arranged, peacefully. And if that didn't work, then it would be a test in the market to show some other ways of, instead of lining up this way, maybe handing out tickets or pieces of paper for an order to come up, would be a different way to do it. But you don't have the government barging in saying you're the one who's being antisocial. And yet this is what these people are saying. They're saying you're the enemy to society. It's like, no, the state is one thing, society is the other, and the state is what invades society in order to exist. And of course, this is the problem with Lockean natural rights theory. And as I said, even though they try to put barriers up against these things. So if you look at something like licensing of this restaurant, they ended up fining this restaurant $5,000. They're going to pull the license. And people don't question this idea of licensing. They'll say, oh, well, you got to be licensed to be able to do this. It's like, well, what is that? That's a threat from politicians and the bureaucrats who are supported only through itself coercion and taxation and threats.
Yep.
So that's a threat from people who exist by threats and you paying them unless you're going to go to jail. And they're now coming up with new threats to say, if you don't conform to the way we want you to run your business, you will not be allowed to do business. So you must come to us, pay us some money, and get permission to operate. And we can revoke that at any time. So these are the sorts of things that it amazes me, because we're seeing the face of all this stuff really coming about, Nikki. And I'll just mention as an aside, if people want to get into the deeper sort of the economic terminology of this, what this is it goes back to Adam Smith. It's mercantilism. Licensing is a form of what they call rent seeking. It's a way to stop small upstarts from competing with you. It's the same thing as a tariff for objects coming in, products coming in from other countries, as you know. It's a form of what's called regulatory capture. As I mentioned at the beginning when I was, posing as Gil Bates or whatever. Oftentimes the left-wingers will say, well, we need to have the state protect us from these things that are actually voluntary, but they depict them as bad or dangerous or whatever. And the larger these things get, the more powerful they get, they say. So therefore, we have to have the state get involved. And they have to regulate. They have to license. But the problem is that what you end up getting is certain big guys giving money to the politicians to stop the little guys from entering. That harms the very poor people because they can't get stuff that's cheap. It might be a little riskier, but with perfection and trial and error, the best start to rise to the top. That's how all products are introduced. You've got to let people do this. So you got regulatory capture, you've got mercantilism, and the regulatory capture, one of the most dangerous things that we can see now comes in the vaccines. They only allow a certain number of corporations to make vaccines. 1986, as you know, they had the vaccine court that they set up. The federal government basically hid lawsuits of anybody who wanted to sue the vaccine corporations for producing something that harmed them. It's very difficult to find out what happened in those courts. And now you've got people pushing for vaccines for Cowabunga 19, and that's somehow the magic answer. When anybody who knows anything about the history of vaccines knows, they're like, oh, we got to get to 95% efficacy. You're never going to get to 95% efficacy. That's like saying we're going to all ride unicorns. It's insane. It's completely nuts. And yet they're suppressing the economy, waiting for this sort of stuff. And they don't even know what the fatality rate is. They can't know what the numerator is or the denominator. They don't know what it's absolutely crazy. I think James Corbett made a great point over in Japan with the Corbett Report. James Corbett, hats off if you see this, James. Love you. You're awesome, dude. Awesome. James Corbett, and by the way, I would show James Corbett's videos to my students in classes. It was great. I would like sneak in stuff. I'd play like Killing Joke videos and stuff. It was great. But anyway, one of the best videos I would recommend to show to students if you want them to understand a little bit of the horrors of war is Kasabian's song Empire. It's about 4 minutes. It's epic. The video is like a little movie. But anyway, James was bringing this up. He's like, look, this is a mythological, even though this does exist, the threat is unknown.
Right.
So are we going to license people to go outside for any unknown threat? And where does that stop? And this goes towards the libertarian argument of who will build the roads because they license us to go on the roads. They control us. Right?
Now, every time I hear that, I just think of, I don't know, did you see that video that Eric July did where and this is going to be demonetized anyway, he was like, fuck your hoe ass roads. Did you see that? No. That's what it's so good. It's so good. And that's all I think of now. Every time someone's like, who would build the roads? Hoe ass roads. It's amazing. I'll have to find it and send it to you
later. Thank you. That is awesome. And what's really interesting is, and this, hats off to Tom DiLorenzo, and so many other writers who have done great research into the history of private roads, whether it's Bob Murphy, listening to Bob Murphy's or Tom Woods podcasts. And Bob, I'm glad Bob is a little bit closer now. He's not too far away now. So maybe be able to invite him or get together for some black market dinner or something like that. But I'll throw you the food. But anyway, I'm driving by. Just drive by hot dogs, But the history of road making in the United States is such that if a business person is smart enough to want to pave his driveway to get into the business and plow it, usually more quickly and more efficiently than the state plow people. And by the way, I have it on record that at least one town in New Hampshire, they have the guys sit inside and get paid for hours before they put the plows on the roads. And by that time, it's all compacted.
Oh, my God.
Oh, it's ridiculous. And, it's a classic example of what is seen and what's not seen. The government will promote the new bridge that they're opening, but
of course.
you won't see the decaying bridge a little bit later. But anyway, what got me was the idea that somehow you couldn't get roads if the private market is like, no, historically in England, roads originated as cow pastures and pathways through British common law. It wasn't until the British monarchy and their fiefdom system came around, and then with the enclosure system that got it even worse, that they started to put up tolls. And I was recording something a little bit earlier. Neil Peart, drummer from Rush, my brother sent me a great quote. He was actually aware of that history. Then in the United States, you've got Tom DiLorenzo and others talking about how thousands of miles of roads were built in the United States privately. And they got around this so-called problem of the tragedy of the commons. The tragedy of the commons really only happens when the government runs something, because then everybody argues how it's going to run. That's why when they say that a restaurant is a public place rather than a private place, which is what it actually is, They say, oh, well, we should all have a say in it, just like the roads. So if they can license you to be on the roads, they can license you to open up a restaurant, they can even license you if you're going to walk outside now, even for a mystery illness like this.
Mm-hmm. I definitely want to talk more about that because I've got some things to say about that. But I want to make sure we have a backlog of super chats here now.
Oh, so. Hey, great. Hi, everybody. Hi.
But I see that Trash Man wasn't here doing his intro, so it threw the whole thing off, and we're going to blame it on him.
No. I love Trash Man's intros. Those are awesome.
They're so good. Yeah. So Sean Marolf says, did you guys hear about the Riverside County, California sheriff saying he would no longer enforce mandates that violate the U.S. Constitution? I have not, and I'm surprised that that's coming out of California.
Yeah, as much as I am opposed to the state, as I said, my fallback would be the Constitution. So hats off to the Oath Keepers and to him. Boy, that's really, really cool.
That is pretty huge.
Yeah.
Robert Chappelle says vocabulary and Macbeth references. Chester Thomas says, hello, Liberty Doll and guest. His history lessons rock.
Oh,
you are definitely very well informed.
Oh, thanks.
John Thomas says, views on the reauthorization of Patriot Act. Vice, for what it's worth, said it allowed a bunch of idiots to look at your browser history without a warrant. So the Patriot Act is, So it's interesting because some of you guys know that I'm writing a story, and there are some hidden references to the Patriot Act in there, interestingly enough. They're bad references. They're very bad. But so I was reading about this not wiretapping, but this bill that would allow them to look at your internet history without a warrant earlier, and I believe it was voted down, but only by one vote, I think.
Boy, oh, I'm glad. I would love to look that up and find out about it, Nikki. And I had heard about it, but I didn't know what had happened.
I mean, I'm trusting a friend from Facebook told me about it today. So I mean, I could be completely wrong, but I'm pretty sure it missed it by one vote.
Boy, that would be awesome. I feel very bad for Rand Paul, but hats off to him on his attempt to try to block the surveillance aspect of FISA. The FISA Act, such a great example of Orwellian newspeak. They come out of the Church Committee hearings in the 70s, and then in 1978, Ted, evidently he had gotten off the drink for a few hours and came up with this wonderful idea where he said, well, we're going to stop the federal government from spying on Americans, and we're going to write the FISA Act. Oh, really? So how's it going to stop them? Well, we'll create a secret star chamber that will issue warrants that are completely contrary to the tradition of common law warrants that are supposed to be public documents issued by judges. And we'll have secret judges, and they'll issue warrants, and they'll allow us to spy on foreigners and Americans if they're connected. And then other Americans if they're connected to those Americans. I mean, It's just, the whole thing's ridiculous.
Oh, it's so ridiculous.
Oh, by the way, quick aside, Nikki, this is just a little message to any of my left-wing writer friends out there. Just to give you an example of some of the hypocrisy that I have seen among really hardcore left-wing writers who think, or at least seem to think, I don't want to assume for them, I get the vibe that they think they're very much in favor of the little guy, sticking up for the little guy, David versus Goliath.
Oh, yeah.
So when the Me Too stuff, when the Me Too stuff popped out on Facebook, it was always believe the victim. So I'm with the victim, right? And, okay, whatever. I'd like to see evidence and things like that, but I'll take every case as it comes and see what happens. I've known people who've been wrongly accused. I know young ladies who've had really tough times with males. Okay, maybe the other way around. Who knows, right? Okay. Literally 3 days later, Rand Paul is attacked by his neighbor.
Yep.
Pummeled to almost killing him. And Rand is a friend of mine, right? So
that's so cool.
Yeah, he's a good guy. I was interviewing him. He's like, hey, we didn't know each other at first, but he was in the studio with me when I was doing my New Hampshire radio show. And he's like, hey, did your dad and my dad know each other? And I was like, he goes, your dad was Paul Goldsmith? I was like, yeah. And my dad worked in the Reagan administration for a while trying to dismantle the education department. And they used to have secret
so cool.
Oh, it was nuts. They would have stuff that was supposed to go to Reagan, and all these Carter holdovers would open up the envelopes and stuff. It was crazy. They would meet in restaurants so that the noise could cover them, and they would try to get away from microphones. It was crazy. He actually left because he's like, I'm not going to change anything, and this is just wasting.
Jeez, and here we are. My dad is he'll as close as my dad gets is he asked for a couple of my t-shirts for Christmas, and I gave them to him, and he walks around and he wears them and says to everyone, this is my daughter. I don't agree with anything she says, but this is my daughter. Thanks, Dad.
Fatherly love, at least. That's maybe you could make the point about the government to say, what if the government said you shouldn't love your daughter? Where do you draw the line, Dad? But anyway, so it was funny though, because I saw just a few days later these posts Oh, so Rand and I got to know each other. He gave me his phone number and stuff. I haven't spoken to him for a while because obviously I'm a little more radical than he is and stuff. But he's a good guy.
Mm-hmm.
Rand is a good dude, and as much as I'm opposed to government, he's a star down there. Sometimes he does things with which I disagree. But like his father, he's pretty principled about the Constitution, and he tries, So a few days after he was beaten to a pulp and put into the hospital and, lost a portion of his lung, these very same writers on Facebook were like, oh, couldn't have happened to a nicer guy. I'm like, so, I just softly, because these guys are good guys, they're nice guys. And I'm just like, I'm saying like, so I said, guys, just the other day you were saying like, I stand with the victim.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think you're dangerously walking towards the line of supporting the attacker here. Aren't you?
Yeah.
So I just have to leave a lot of that stuff, and what can you do? It's weird. Writing is super left wing. It's difficult. But anyway, yeah.
I just want to make sure that we get to these.
Yeah. Super chats. Super chats.
Let's see. Jesse Meek says, sorry, I'm late. Just got my notice 2 minutes ago. Hi, Doll and Mr. Goldsmith. Is anyone else ready for this crappy year to be over already?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Well, yes and no. Yes, but also no, because this crappy year and everything that's going on means that housing prices are going to tank, and I should hopefully be able to get out of here cheap when it happens.
Yeah. And I know that you and your husband have been looking around, and I've been spending a lot of my calculations on getting land, picking stuff up, and moving are a few years behind you, but you are the template. You are the example. Hats off.
Well, so fun fact, instead of researching stories and getting here on time today, I went through my house and just purged a bunch of stuff and filled up the dumpster because it made me feel like I was doing something towards getting out of the state.
Did you put on the siren going?
No, but I should have.
By the way, did you see the report from last month or something where, I don't know whether it was in Georgia, there were a couple municipalities where these foolish members of the police force and an ambulance team used the purge siren for their nighttime curfew.
I heard about that.
Well, we didn't think it'd be too bad. And I'm why don't you just put on Motorhead, the Ace of Spades,
Let's see. Sean Marolf says, almost forgot Daisy Cousins said to let you know she would like to do another dual cast with you. I better write that down because otherwise I'm going to forget that. Yeah. I don't even remember how I got in touch with her in the first place. Probably Twitter? I don't know. We'll figure it out.
She's super cool. Very, very cool.
Mr. Rover Pilot says the main reason to remove God from schools was to make people think all rights come from government, the new big G, and not the God, the new little g. Yeah,
that's a great point. And again, it's a weird normalcy bias. And of course, that twists around the concept of natural rights. And natural rights are negative in nature. You don't have a right to something. You have a right from. It's all negative reciprocity. That's the point, So I often will bring up to people, I'll say, look, if you have a right to something, a lot of times people will argue that, a child can't educate himself, so there's a right to education. But really, functionally, what does that mean? As I make my hands humongous in the camera here, I'm leaning back. Yeah, this is my ode to the prisoner. I am not a number. I'm a free man. I am number 6. But and Patrick McGowan, what a genius he was. That series, The Prisoner, is one of the greatest achievements ever in anything. That show. He was way ahead, and we'll talk about that. We'll have to talk about that.
Yeah, because I had never heard of it until you mentioned it in the email the other day, and I was like, "What is this?"
Yeah, I'll buy you the box set if you like it, or a box set is so 10 years ago, but you gotta watch it, Nikki. It's so amazing. And there's stuff, he questions the Lockean thing of protect other people. They have this, it's super deep. There's a bunch of stuff, Illuminati, Masonic imagery for people who are into that stuff that goes way back. He knew he was genius. That dude, he was really smart. But anyway, yeah, what was it talking about? Yeah, so
negative
natural
rights. Yep.
Yes, negative rights. They're negative in nature. And so if you have a positive right to something, as Jefferson said, no man is born with a saddle on his back, and no man is born with spurs to ride him. And the idea that you have a right to something because a child can't educate himself, basically, if we strip that down, functionally, what that means is, well, that means that the government, the state, whatever entity you want to call it, the non-society thing, which is backed up by the statutory force, statutes being different from law, statutes from the state, law, natural law, as Thomas Aquinas tried to point out, which is where lex mala, lex nulla comes from. Good law, real law, is natural law. Anything that is separate from natural law is bad law, and you can resist it. Which in my view is anything from the state, because the state can only exist by infringing and breaking natural law. There's a very strong line of demarcation there. And anybody who looks at this with any logical honesty, any intellectual honesty, has to admit that any statute that is passed, even if you think it conforms with natural law, it has to be supported through breaking natural law by taking tax money to support police and a justice system. So it is by its nature an infringement of natural law. Natural law and negative rights, people don't have a right to education because that means that the government can take money from person A over here who works for X amount of times and basically give it to person B's child, or the education system for person B's child. Mm-hmm. So they're essentially enslaving person A for X number of hours a day.
It would mean then that they're entitled also to the teachers or whoever's time.
Yes, and that you jump right to the final logical conclusion, Nikki. That's exactly it. And people don't look at it this way, whether it's a right to health care or education or food or anything. If you look at that and you say, okay, so person A can be enslaved for X amount of hours a day, and they don't like that. They don't like that term enslavement. But if he resists, what's going to happen to him? He'll be punished, obviously, and thrown in jail. Stuff will be taken. He'll be hurt. He'll be manhandled by people. He'll be kidnapped and thrown into a jail cell. So why don't we just remove the middleman and enslave all the teachers and make them provide their services for nothing? And so people are like, whoa, how evil of you. You're talking about enslaving teachers? I'm like, no, you're talking about enslaving people. Mm-hmm. You don't understand. That's the logic of what you, behind a government-provided concept of a right to something, stand for. And they don't get it. So anything that is non-aggressive from the start is, I think, a good way to look at things. So anyway, yeah. But sorry, back to the super chats. I know you got a lot. I can't see them, but I know you must have a lot. So yeah.
I like I said, I want to make sure that we get everybody here.
Yeah, thanks for bringing me in. This is great.
Let's see. Robert Chappelle says, "I'm the only libertarian I know, but I like everyone in my circle." That's nice. I don't know. I've spread my little tentacles here and there, so I've converted a few people into my liberty cults.
Oh, that's cool.
Omega Racitsu says, from Michigan, of course you were talking about Detroit Free Press. Anyhow, you missed something. The Republican-led Michigan legislature is suing the governor. I do know that. They did that at the last protest. That's what they ended up doing with the legislative session, is that the Michigan GOP announced that they were going to sue Whitmer. I don't really know what's going on with that at the moment, but I know that that's what they're trying to do. FL Sheepdog 1 says the First and Second Amendments have never been so important in our lifetime. I agree. Mr. Rover Pilot telling me to drink my water.
Good point. That's right.
And I know a couple more popped in, so we'll grab those and then get back into the discussion. So Mr. Rover Pilot says all licenses are about control, not safety. And that's actually what I was going to go back to. Robin Patty says, if you want to see regulations, you should run a gun business. The ATF will sit you down for an entire day to go over them before you can open. The most regulated industry in the country. I could see that. Definitely.
Yeah, and it's amazing because it's one of the key things that they explicitly said, hands off, and it's like, what now is one of the most regulated things. It's just, Nick, I just want to mention, I'm sort of sitting here and I'm looking at the screen and I can see, I've got my computer over here. So my monitor is just a little bit over from where my camera is. So I've been looking at the camera, sometimes addressing things. But it's kind of cool that as I look at the screen and I look at you over there, the way it's set up, it's like I'm looking at you. And I'm just so psyched. It's so cool to be talking to you right now. And it's strange, for anybody who gets involved with like a live stream or anything like that. You anticipate it, you look forward to it, you're doing your work during your day, you've been doing your work, and what an amazing field you're in. It's just incredible, Nikki, the way you've been able to utilize your smarts and help people in your other professional career. And but to be a guy who has been, slowly trying to get back to doing more, and I've been doing stuff with MRC TV and so on. It's great. It's just a really cool thing on a personal level to be able to look at you over here on the screen and see you smiling and just, hats off. You're just a real pleasure to watch every time. Yeah, it's true.
and I was like, oh man, my hair's a mess today and blah blah blah. But
yeah, me too.
Let's see. Mr. Rover Pilot says time for secure VPNs, and NordVPN is one of my affiliates now, and I asked them for the partnership because I use them, and I forgot to put the link in the description. Oh, right. It's in the description of the last live stream.
Yeah, that works. All right, that's cool.
Andy Robichaud says money's for finally getting Gardner to come on, and Gardner gets his super chat from the 3 books of his I just ordered. Wow.
Oh,
fancy.
Dude, that is so cool, Andy. Thank you so much. Yeah, I gotta say, Nikki, it's gonna be one of these deals where I'll just give you a quick aside, everybody. So I have my new novel, Teamizer, that's coming out. And, if you watch a lot of videos, you'll hear people mention the names of their books, right? Mm-hmm. And, working in radio, you have a writer on and you want to mention the name of the book and all this stuff. And it's sort of like, well, yeah, you got to get the name out there so people will know it and stuff. But it almost seems, to some people, I think it might seem sort of calculating and stuff. And I just, mentioning it in conversation. You and I have been writing to each other about writing and stuff. So to me, it's just, it's one of the stories I've been working on, and it's going to be coming out. But there is a very big barrier for liberty-minded writers, and I'll give you an example. And by the way, if you see me rubbing my neck, it's just that I've been sitting in very strange circumstances.
Well,
so
you rub your neck, and I will fix my lamp so that my lamp.
Ah, very good, very good. I'm rubbernecking a car crash going by. Oh, look, there's some more of our rights being destroyed on the side of the highway. But anyway. Yeah, it's interesting, Nikki. This is actually the second novel that I've written. Mm-hmm. The first novel I wrote got accepted by a publishing company a number of years ago. Yeah, it's the sequel to my novella called Bite. Mm-hmm. Originally, Bite was going to be one story. And
I'm not going to lie, I was looking at that on Amazon the other day.
Oh, cool. Well, if you get it, that's actually the start of something that's going to be huge. It's going to be massive. And that is what incorporates everything all together and has some massive libertarian themes and so on. So Bite was originally just going to be one story. And it's basically, it's about a private detective guy who works in this really strange field. He's in his mid-50s. He's sort of an overweight schlub. He's never had a real relationship. And it's really starting to rain out here. And he gets paid by governments, small governments and insurance companies to take out vampires, to kill them. And so,
nice.
Yeah, because they're a liability. So nobody knows, oh, wait a minute, I gotta, okay, cool. So, yeah, so nobody knows that he does this work, and there's a small network of vampire killers out there. And basically, the story was metaphorical for me because I was getting really tired. I had worked in LA and I wanted to get back to script writing. I had worked at The Outer Limits and at Star Trek Voyager, and I wanted to do that. And you have to have a certain perspective when you approach these stories, as I know you've been able to grasp this, Nikki, and some people don't, and they burn out. And I was getting pretty frustrated every day having to look at what people were trying to do to screw with my neighbors. And it just drove me nuts. And running into politicians who wouldn't read their supposed rule books and get upset at you for, having the gall to bring it up to them. So the story is basically a metaphorical to me wanting to get out of working constantly to try to promote liberty and stuff like that and fight these bad guys. So I'm sort of like the Sylvester Cole character, who's the main character. So anyway, he's going to leave. He's going to get out. And he goes to this bar in Vegas. And the reason I chose Vegas is because it's a reference to Kolchak, the original Kolchak, the Night Stalker show, which was written by Richard Matheson. It was a great, great story set in Las Vegas. And it's sort of a noir-esque sort of sound. It's got a lot of that a noir, Kolchak-y noir sort of thing. Anyway, so that story was only going to be a standalone. And then I was at the World Horror Convention in 2013, where it debuted, or 2013. And a wonderful woman named Michelle was there from England, and she and her husband were there. And she read it overnight. And she came in, she goes, "I've read your story." I was going to watch something. We were all going to watch, some guy do a little performance. So she said, "Oh, I loved it. What happens next?" And I was like, "Well, nothing. That's the end." Like, "Oh no, there's got to be more." And I was like, "You know what? I got it." She's like, "What?" And literally, I had the whole novel like in an instantly. I was like, I have a whole novel right now, just because you said that. I got it. She's like, "Are you kidding me?" I was like, "No." So I wrote the novel. It's 400. Yeah, it was a big novel.
I wish my brain did that.
Oh yeah, it was wild, and it was super easy to write. Prose writing is much more difficult than script writing, because script writing is basically just dialogue and directions, and maybe some subtext. But prose is the rhythm of the words, the paragraph transitions, everything. It's really tough. So anyway, so I wrote it, and it got accepted by this publishing company. But then the publishing company said, "Oh, by the way, we hope that you're going to split your online political personality from your written work."
Oh.
And I was like, "No, why would I do that?" Like they didn't even get it. Like they had no concept that I wouldn't want to hide my political identity from readers. Like they're like, "Well, politics can get in the way." I'm like, screw that. Like I only live so long. Like why would I not? In fact, you'll probably get more readers who are familiar with me from libertarian circles than the other way around. Like so I declined the contract, and it hasn't. That book has not been published. So yeah, that's why T Miser is coming out before that one, which is called Flight, and it actually is the continuation of the Bite story. So if people are wondering, it's ready to go. And it forms a massive series of stories.
I'm kind of amazed, honestly, that it even was accepted by a publisher, because I just, I assumed that if I ever actually finish any of the stories I'm working on, that I would have to self-publish them because no one would accept them. That's just,
and it's interesting you should bring it up, and that's sort of the point that I'm getting to exactly, Nikki. I mean, you nailed it. We in these circles, we know how little respect we're given online from publishing corporate companies and corporations, but we have friends. We have people who are sentimentally close. Many paleo conservatives like MRC TV, they're terrific. We disagree in some areas. Libertarians, voluntarists, people who are curious about this, and so it's up to us, I think. The publishing company with which I'm connected now is very small. They're in California. They can barely get into bookstores. It's mostly going to be online. So when I, mention the book or whatever, it's partially to let people know about the books, but it's also a message to say, I think as things go, I'm going to have to participate. Other people, if they would be willing to participate, to promote my work, to tell two friends, hey, I just bought this. That's the way we're going to get our stuff out there. And hopefully the quality is good enough that, people will like it as well. And they're not just doing it because, we're liberty-minded people. But I think a lot of times quality stuff gets overlooked because of people's positions. Yeah.
I mean, sometimes I get hopeful because, what is it that I'm reading right now? I'm reading this book called Future. It's by the same guy that wrote Metro 33 or 3033 or whatever. And I guess his book was originally self-published and then got published and translated. And so was, I think it was the guy that wrote Red Rising. I don't know if you've read that series. It is so good. Yeah. So good. And I want to say that first book was self-published first, too. And then someone found it and took it. I mean, it's not as heavy-handed, I suppose, as anything you or I would write probably is. But there's definitely some, undertones where I was reading it and I was like, wait a minute.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fascinating. I really appreciate it, connecting with you. And we were talking a little bit about another writer that had some stuff that I checked out. I just chanced on it. I was like, boy, this is great. And there's some historical writers that occasionally you'll see somebody pop up, like, Merry Adventures of Robin Hood is a terrific libertarian story. It's wonderful. It's great. And people don't understand Robin Hood was a tax protester. He was a violent tax protester. That's who Robin Hood was.
What are you talking about? He was a socialist, man.
I know.
Taking from the rich people.
Yeah, it's like, no, he was getting money back that the sheriff was taking. He'd be the first in line to break into the Michigan State House. But
that would be awesome.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I have an idea. I've already approached a couple of the more high-profile professional libertarian writers on this. It's an idea for an anthology, and I mentioned this a little bit to you in email, Nikki, and it's going to come down the line in a little while, but I think it would be a terrific idea. And there have been some great libertarian writers who they're awesome. You look at F. Paul Wilson and Repairman Jack. Repairman Jack is like the ultimate anarchist. He's great. And interestingly enough, curiously enough, in the stories of Repairman Jack, F. Paul Wilson has a character who lives in Jack's building in New York, and his name is Neil the Anarchist, and that's L. Neil Smith, who is an anarchist.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah, it's great. It's totally awesome. And he had one story called Midnight Mass where he mentioned Lysander Spooner, and that was really cool. And that one was kind of a fun metaphorical one because vampires, bloodsuckers, take over the world in Midnight Mass.
So I actually have a story that I started writing in probably 2010, 2011. Because when I was younger, I pretty much only wrote stories with characters that were vampires because I was a wicked cool goth kid. And I was obsessed with Anne Rice when I was 13. Which is a weird age to be obsessed with Anne Rice. But, and I created this whole...
What if she were...
I created this...
If she were an objectivist, would she be Ayn Rice or Anne... Vampire Shrugged?
But I created this whole city that was secretly run by this vampire overlord, and that they had tax day, and tax day was when you had to give up some of your blood to the vampire government.
Oh, I guess cool.
I never finished it, but it's been percolating in there.
These are well, and I know, based on what I've seen of your story so far, it's very cool. I love it. It reminds me of the story in Doctor Who. There was a period in Doctor Who when Philip Hinchcliffe was the producer, and Robert Holmes was one of their key writers, and Terrence Dicks was the script editor, and of course Tom Baker played the Doctor, and it was hardcore libertarian. They even mentioned, in one episode called The Android Invasion, two aliens are talking about the Doctor, and they say he has a long a long association with libertarian causes. And this was like 1975 that they, so the term, like somebody was pretty keyed in. And they have this one episode called The Sunmakers, where the Doctor and Leela land on Pluto. And Pluto is now basically a giant city. It's a megropolis, it's called. And it's circled by 6 orbiting nuclear suns that provide sunlight and heat. And basically the people who live there, they live their whole lives as indentured servants or essentially eternal slaves to a government-granted corporation. And in the story, they named all of the corridors in the megropolis buildings after British tax forms.
That's awesome. That is really cool.
Yeah. It's so good. This is the era when they did, Genesis of the Daleks and stuff like that. So it was very, very, liberty minded and
interesting.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. Huh. So
course, I never really could get into Doctor Who, but I might have to give it another shot.
Those particular episodes, anything some of the early ones are also very good with William Hartnell. The Aztecs is a terrific story. It's really good. Some of the Patrick Troughton ones, I think if you go with like the 10th Planet, that's a good one. Some of them are sort of sketchy. You get into John Pertwee, almost all the John Pertwees are terrific, really great. And John Pertwee was just so charismatic and what a nice guy, very cool guy. Then, of course, going into Tom Baker, up until they changed the theme from the Diamond Vortex and the original Delia Derbyshire theme, and they made it like spacey and they made it electronic. Up until Philip Hinchcliffe left, it was just superb. It was just so good. Yeah, they took a lot of motifs from Hammer horror and stuff like that. It was great.
I'm learning so much.
Well, a lot of geek stuff. Sorry.
Fixed Bayonet says, as my favorite Spurg says, keep fighting. About what? I've been busy. Draxus Storm Shadow says, more people are killed by hammers than semi-auto rifles. #hammer control. That is true. FL Sheepdog says, whoever thought that cutting hair would be an act of patriotism? Definitely not something that I saw coming. That's for sure.
It's almost something, it's like something from a Terry Gilliam movie, like hairstylist destroys the government. It's absurd. It is. Yeah, it's weird, Oh, sorry. Yeah, if you have more super chats, go for it.
Oh, yeah. 6 Turning 4 Burning says, I heard a California sheriff said they weren't enforcing the Newsom's BS, I'll say, because they were too busy rearresting recently released inmates doing crimes. So I know in LA County, actually, they're not doing bail or anything, so they're not arresting anyone right now because they don't want to have anyone in the jails like awaiting bail or anything like that. So...
And is it California where they are not arresting or prosecuting people for petty theft under $700 or $900?
I believe so. Well, I remember way back when Cowabunga started, California was talking about it, and so was New York, I believe, because there was actually even a movement in New York to get everyone out of the jails, even like rapists and murderers and stuff like that. And even here in Massachusetts, they released some people, and some of the people that they released were pedophiles and like active sex offenders, which is pretty creepy. So
maybe they're going to go to Joe Biden events or something. I don't know.
Maybe. Oh, Joe Biden.
I'm just saying, Come on, man! Oh, jeez. Yeah, it's the very purpose of the government supposedly to protect us, and yet in every instance they try to disarm us. Look at Massachusetts. It's a great example of, okay, look, if you're going to even have gun registration or gun licensing or any of those things, if the offices are shutting down, you're not going to get a gun unless you do a black market.
Yep.
So yeah.
Yep.
Crazy.
Supposedly, the circuit court ruled that Massachusetts gun shops are allowed to reopen now. But I mean, I don't know. Baker's going to try to throw his weight around because that's how he do.
Yeah, so. And then you got Maura Healey. Jesus. Oh. I mean, does she only have brown shirts in her wardrobe? I'm not sure.
I believe so.
Oh, she's, you know, and I hate to say this because, you know, I don't want to say she's repulsive or whatever, but I mean, you hope that they will learn and they'll grow and redeem themselves and, you know, realize the error of their ways. It's, you know, everybody's human, but.
No, I mean, instead she's just going to dismiss all the lawsuits against her. I mean, it works way easier than learning.
You're a smart woman. Yep. So true.
Drax's Storm Shadow asks if this shirt comes in camo. No, but I believe it comes in a color called Army Brown.
Yes, in fact, I was going to wear my Liberty Doll Boogaloo.
That would have been so funny if you did, because we would have matched
them side by side. It would be perfect.
I ordered a couple mugs, but they've been floating around in oblivion for like 4 weeks now. I guess. Wow. I don't really know.
Yeah, I love to wear your shirt to Barnes & Noble. It's awesome. Yeah, it freaks people out. I wear that one, and I got one from High Impact Vlogs. And they hate that too. It's like
the Barnes & Noble part of that is really random to me.
Yeah, you know, because it's like a lot of left-wingers, you know, they'll go to the Barnes & Noble cafe and get their funky, you know, triple mocha cappuccino heart on my sleeve frappe or whatever, you know, and I'm like, yeah, I got to use the bathroom, give me some water, and I need a book, you know. I'm out of here. I'm going to the used record store next door. Thanks.
Torque One says that Maura Healey is repulsive. Sean Marolf says that California sheriff is Chad Bianco. Oblividan says, greetings from the free state of Iowa. Just got done arguing with a friend about the USPS. Apparently I'm fascist for wanting to let it die. The post office. Oh my God, I could say a million things about the post office because the post office has been like bleeding money and on the brink of bankruptcy forever. And my father is a retired letter carrier, and the crap that they would do, and like, oh my God. And I remember, I didn't really understand it when I was a small child, but like, you know, every once in a while he would pick me up from school and then like bring me back to the post office to do like whatever. And like, it always smells like a liquor store in there, even at 2 p.m. Does not matter. And it's like all your mailman, if he is like over the age of 25, like he's probably drunk or on pills. That's just flat out what it is. And nowadays, they don't even hire full-time people, and they purposely lay everyone off for like 1 or 2 weeks out of the year so they don't have to give them benefits.
Oh, of course. Yeah, you know, and that brings me back to Lysander Spooner. I mean, what a great hero he was, starting up his own private postal service in the 19th century in Massachusetts.
That is pretty badass.
And he gets shut down. It's like, yeah, no wonder he opposed the government. Yeah. Good job, Spooner.
Here, I know that, so stamps.com is a thing where you can get your discounted stamps. And we actually, for my husband's business, he buys and sells collectibles. And he actually has to take his packages for his business and go to a different town to use their post office because here, the Postmaster General hates us just because he uses stamps.com and he's like, well, you see, you're taking money away from the post office. And it like became this huge big thing. Yes.
Wow.
And he would like put those little like stamps, like that postage owed stamps on his packages for like 1 cent, 2 cents to like all of his customers. He did that for like months.
That'd be like federally subsidized PBS getting angry because you're, like renting out a DVD and not watching PBS. What do you mean you don't want to watch another Ken Burns documentary praising the government? No, thank you. And I'd rather not pay for it through my taxes either. I mean, they're both subsidized. That's hilarious.
I just see on the side here, Planet Nut 767 says, yeah, the bar down the street from where I grew up was full of postal workers by noon. Facts. Oh, man. I could talk about the post office for days. Twerk1 says government was invented to control. They don't fix anything, help anyone, or protect anyone. What is that? Why is that fact so difficult for people to understand? They seem so eager to sacrifice their liberty for nothing, especially right now.
Yeah. And of course, I think it's incumbent on us to, at least conversationally, intellectually, to provide people with maybe a few windows here and there, because I think a lot of them, their defensive postures pop up where they say, well, yeah, I don't like this. I just think if we can only manage it better, they won't address the heart of immorality of it, which is threatening people to make them pay for something. They won't address that. They'll think, well, we're stuck with it. We just have to manage this and so on and so forth. So if you can show them some windows of opportunity to say, well, not only are there better ways to do it, but by the government doing this or that or the other thing, you're actually creating greater problems, like the vaccine court, like the regulatory state. Mary Ruwart's latest book is terrific, Death by Regulation. Dr. Mary Ruwart, of course, she wrote the book Healing Our World in an Age of Aggression. She's a wonderful, amazing person. And if anybody gets an opportunity to look up Mary Ruwart, follow her on Twitter, check out anything Mary Ruwart is putting out there, because she is one of the really, really prime idea expressors for freedom. And she shows all these different things. Minimum wage backfires. It hurts the poor. Walter Williams has spoken about that. So many things where people have these assumptions and say, no, there's a better way to do this. If you get the hands of government out, you will get roads built. You will have security systems. You will have people providing for the poor. There's a great book called The Tragedy of American Compassion that shows how voluntary groups started in the United States and in the colonies, and even in big cities through up to the end of the 19th century. They would do it in New York on 4 square block areas. That's how all these groups like the Odd Fellows and the Elks, that's how they formed. And there was a connection. When a person received help, they did it locally and they saw their neighbors and they wanted to reciprocate. So they created these bonds. You weren't behind some plexiglass thing with a circle and, it's like, number 42, a little reference to H.R.G's guy, step up. So it's interesting. Some people are like, well, one person said to me, what about security? What about terrorism? Like, oh, you mean the terrorists who are going after Americans and have openly said, like the Times Square bomber, when they asked him, how do you plead? He said, guilty, 1,000 times guilty. I'm quoting verbatim, by the way. I've memorized it. And if the United States government continues to do what it is doing in the Middle East, more innocent Americans are going to die, is what he said.
Well, I mean, that's what Ron Paul talked about with like the blowback and everything.
Yeah. And remember this, Nikki? They booed him at the Republican convention, at the Republican debate when he said it. He's like, look, I'm just telling you what they said. Like, who are you booing? You're booing yourself.
Yep.
You're booing your own actions. It's... Anyway.
Let's see. DV Ken Bravo says, excellent stream tonight, doll. Here's some voluntary love to go towards your camo stockpile for the coming luau. Get to the freedom of South Carolina soon. I have to tell you guys, actually, so my husband, it's funny you say like the camo stockpile. My husband actually bought me a tactical vest for my birthday. Oh. And it is so cool.
Girl, you got your ring, you got your vest, you got a good man.
And the best part of it is he had to order me child size because the regular human being size was too big. I feel like that really like makes the story.
That's funny, Nikki, because watching on video, I don't know how tall you are or whatever, and people know that we know each other as you mentioned, we're pen pals and stuff, and you're literally like 45 minutes away drive from me. It's like probably pretty close. Mm-hmm. As is Bob Murphy now, and so there are a lot of people around, and I'm 6'4", and I weigh like,
oh my God.
Yeah,
you're so more than a foot taller than me.
Well, the girl I took to the prom was 5'1", so she was like down here the whole time we're dancing. I'm like, it was terrible. It was so bad. So I had no idea. That's funny.
Yeah, I'm little. Draxus Storm Shadow says, check out Lars Larson on your spare time. I can't send you a link, so just Google it. I will write down that name. I mean, if the name's cool, Lars Larson.
I'll put on my Gil Bates glasses.
Mine don't do that. Mine are real.
Oh, by the way, I even brought a sweater and like a collared shirt underneath it to put on for my Gil Bates thing, but it's too hot, so.
It is pretty toasty out today for New England. Yeah. Sean Marolf says, if you guys offer hard copies of your book, be sure to send a copy to the U.S. Copyright Office. It's a requirement under federal law. Really?
Are you
That's
serious?
A weird.
Hey,
that's weird. Hey. Why? I mean, why ask why? Because government. That's why. But that's bizarre.
I'm gonna send them. I'm gonna invest in a separate book that just says F-U, 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 like for 400 pages. It'd be like all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy, and send that to the Copyright Office.
I feel like that's how you get swatted or something.
You're probably right. Hey, but I should mention too, Nikki, is and I know Andy brought this up on Facebook. So Andy, oh, sorry, I'm snorting.
I wasn't gonna point it out.
And now I'm looking at my mouth. It looks like I'm like Venom. It's like. But anyway, so I was going to say about copyright. So one of the things that's curious is, just to let you know, there are two things. So Andy said, "Oh, can mention Star Trek?" There's one story. One of the articles early articles I got published for the Freeman Foundation for Economic Education was about Star Trek. Mm-hmm. I had this idea for Star Trek, and it actually has it goes in two vectors. So it's like 3D. But anyway, so I had this idea for Star Trek that I had originally. So the Institute for Humane Studies gave me some funding to go work with the Outer Limits, and when I found out that the Institute for Humane Studies had this, I wrote up a sample script. I wrote up a sample outline. It was a Star Trek outline, and I wrote up a half-hour script like a Twilight Zone story. Which I ended up sending to Rod Serling's wife, and she was so nice. Carol Serling wrote back, she's like, wow, this reminds me of something that Rod wrote. And I was like, oh, wow, that's so cool. She's a really nice lady, too. I've been in touch with her since I was like 14. Super cool lady. I'll tell you that story later. It's such a cool story. But anyway, so I had this outline for Star Trek Voyager, and I sent it to Homicide was on the air at that time. The Outer Limits was up in Vancouver. Homicide was down in Baltimore. And I sent it to Star Trek Voyager. And Star Trek Voyager had this thing called the Writers Guild Fellowship. And so I was wondering if I, might get that or some other, this IHS thing. Maybe I could combine them, whatever. I didn't hear back from Star Trek, but I heard from the Outer Limits in Vancouver. And I went to work at the Outer Limits, and that was really cool. Like the X-Files dominated the city at the time. It was really, really cool. It was great. And my friend Tom Tanisco, what a great guy. Tom, if you're watching, I miss you, man. just in my heart, dude, in my heart. So it was a cool place. I used to walk around a lot, and I was recuperating from all those injuries. So I would go for these long walks, listen to the Psychedelic Furs first album, just, having a great time, go to this used bookstore. And I wrote that outline into a full script. Then I came back from the Outer Limits from that season, which was 96. And I had turned it into a script, sent it off to an agent in LA. And so now it was time to get an agent because I'm making my steps. And I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to do it. I always wanted to do television and films, but I got hurt. And I wasn't sure if if my life was going to take some other path or what, But I was like, okay, you're gonna make it. You're gonna do it. So, so about a week after I sent the script off, I got a phone call from my friend Dan, and in fact, I actually taught his daughter, so she's familiar with this story. And I had told him about the idea, and he goes, "Hey, Guard." I was like, "Yeah." He goes, "You gonna watch Voyager tonight?" And I was like, "Well, sometimes I miss it. It's not super high on my list." He goes, "Yeah, I think you might want to watch tonight." And I was like, "Why?" He goes, "Because there's a story on that's exactly like that story you told me that you wrote." And I was like, "Oh, no, are you kidding me?" So I watched it, and literally I'm sitting on the bed that I, would sleep in as a kid when I grew up, back home here in New Hampshire, watching on this little screen, and they're saying lines that I wrote.
Wow.
From my head. And actors are saying these things. And it was like, this is absolutely bizarre. So I'm not, for legal reasons, I won't go into the details of it. All I'm going to say is, I'm not going to specify which episode or the writer or whatever. I got a phone call a week after that show was on from Star Trek.
Yep.
From the individual who had written that script.
And
this person said, "Oh, hey, sorry it took us so long. It had been a year. Oh, we just got to your stuff now. And we're wondering if you'd like to come work with us." So I had to quickly calculate, what am I going to do? What am I going to say? Oh, yeah. So I had to, and this is, I'll just tell you, there are great people that were there. Brandon Braga, awesome guy. And Brandon and I have seen each other since then. He's pro-freedom. He's a good guy and very smart. And Jerry Taylor, who is the executive producer, wonderful lady. Very, very cool lady. Lots of great people. Ira Bear invited me upstairs when he heard me. I was singing Anthrax by Gang of Four. Yeah. And because they'd had the anthrax scare, and he goes, "Hey," he peeked around the corner and said, "Hey, Gang of Four." And I was like, "Yeah." He goes, "You know Gang of Four?" I'm like, "Yeah, man. Do you know Shriekback?" And he goes, "No." And I was like, "Well, it's members of Gang of Four, XTC. They combined Barry Andrews. It's great stuff." And he goes, "Dude, you got to come upstairs." So I went up to his office. He loves Iggy Pop. And he had gotten Iggy in a Deep Space Nine episode. So we were going to go see The Dam together. And it turned out that he already had tickets to go see Fear. But, really good guy. Ira's a great, great guy. And I believe he was right down the street from Bill Mumy as well. And Bill Mumy has had great things to say about Ira Bear. He's like a godfather for Bill Mumy's daughter. But anyway, so there are some great people. But in this particular instance, this particular person, I had some suspicions. And I was like, oh, this is not good. So I accepted. And later it turned out I felt pretty strongly. I was like, you know what? I don't feel too good about what happened here. I'm not going to say anything. You can sort of connect the dots. Later, something similar happened with someone else for a story that I had pitched. And so it's a strange thing because that gets us into the concept of copyrights and intellectual property. And this is
a tough one for me.
Yeah,
I'm not going to lie.
So there are practical reasons not to have copyright, and there are practical reasons to debate, how long a copyright will be. But this will show you an example for constitutionalists out there. This will be an example of why the Constitution is not the be-all and end-all. And there's a larger perspective here that you can explore, at least intellectually. So with intellectual property, that is a constitutional purview. The Congress can set up the copyright, patent, trademark rules. And unfortunately, it's another example of regulatory capture, of rent seeking. So back in the 90s, Disney was going to lose the copyright on Mickey Mouse. It was going to go into public domain, which meant anybody could have done drawings of Mickey and been creative with it. And we've really sort of seen that sort of thing with, you know, videos nowadays anyway, right? Mm-hmm. It's become much more anarchic and much more no rulers, and people can do their own thing and stuff. But sometimes people do run into, as you see on YouTube, copyright flags. They pull things down. You get accused, even though you haven't used something, you get a copyright flag. Like, what are you talking about? You know?
Oh, that's happened to me so much lately.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you know. So so it's very interesting because I had to make a choice. You know, am I going to sue or not? Mm-hmm. And I was like, you know, I would be backing down on my principles if I sued and said, oh, you've broken the copyright of the government. Now, it would be a different thing if I had something written that said, you will not copy this, and then I sued to say you broke our agreement. That would be much more like a common law tortious claim. Mm-hmm. But I decided not to sue. That was a lot of money in both instances, and I dropped it. And sometimes I think, you know, would I be in LA now? Would I be working for a TV show? And you think about these opportunities that you've lost, but then you think, no, you know what? I think I was meant to, you know, in the grand scheme of things, not be there. Mm-hmm. And start working in the liberty circles. And I was here with my parents when they needed me. And, you know, I was there when my mom passed away. I was holding her hand. And I wouldn't have been in these places to be here with my niece as she grows up. And you know, I took care of my brother's cats. One of them was very sick. You know, you look at all these things. It's sort of like that story Candide with Pangloss. Dr. Pangloss is sort of a cipher for the philosopher Leibniz, who had said that all that happens in this world is for the best because God created this world. So even the bad stuff, there's some sort of plan. And Voltaire, who wrote Candide, reacted to Leibniz and said, no, that's bogus. Now, I think Voltaire was great in his attitude towards government. It's very anti-government. But in this instance, he wrote a story about this character named Candide, who has everything going for him at the opening of the story. It's very short. And then he's having an affair with the Duke's daughter and all this stuff. He gets caught with her out in the hedgerows and he's thrown out. So he loses all his riches. Everything, it's like a series of unfortunate events. It's actually well written compared to those. And those are just torture. But anyway, so in the end, just a spoiler alert, everybody, he loses the girl, but he's back with her in the end. And there's this character named Dr. Pangloss who says everything that happens in this world is for the best because God created this, the best of all possible worlds. In fact, I opened T-Miser with that quote. I put it in there. Yeah, in the novel, which should be coming out very soon, folks. But anyway, so in the end, Candide, they're in like northern Africa. They're dirt poor. He's back together with the woman who's now like a toothless hag. And Dr. Pangloss is there. They're on dry soil. They're trying to raise onions, and they're basically barely surviving. And they're having a break with some water under a shade tree, the only tree. And he's been like whipped and all this stuff. And Pangloss is like, isn't this great? and Candide looks at Dr. Pangloss like, what? He's like, you know, if you hadn't been thrown out of the estate, if you hadn't been whipped to almost a moment of your life by the Algerian army, if you hadn't almost drowned, if you hadn't lost this, we all wouldn't be here together right now, enjoying this glass of water. And Candide's like, yeah, I got to get back to the onions, man. And he's like, you're an idiot, you know? And when I first read it, my dad gave it to me. He's like, why don't you read this card? And when I first read it, I was with Candide. I was like, Pangloss is a fool, you know? Mm-hmm. He's just, you know, he's making stuff up. And then I thought, you know, whether it's an innate human action or it's, you know, some defense mechanism or it's more of a spiritual religious thing to say there's a plan. there seem to be some major things that happen in people's lives that they look at as being very, very bad, but they put them in the right spot.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if anybody is going through hardship right now, if anybody is wondering, is it worth it? What am I getting out of this? There's nobility in the struggle. Don't ever give up, ever, because
and it builds character.
Exactly. My dad, when I was really sick, my dad, he said, "Don't ever give up."
Mm-hmm.
So, anyway,
that's some good advice. Good advice. So. John Thomas says government is never benevolent, at best benign, and usually malevolent. I think that's pretty accurate.
Right on, John. Big time.
And oh my God, It's 9:00.
Oh, geez.
Wow. That happened quickly.
Thanks for sticking with us, everybody. And Nikki, thank you as well. Oh, and by the way, on the copyright thing, I just want to mention, if people are interested in this, there are a lot of libertarian scholars who have talked about copyright and how having government control copyright. There are two things. First, it's constitutional. Mm-hmm. Okay, but it leads to big corporations influencing copyright. So, for example, the only reason Paul's Boutique by the Beastie Boys exists is because they got a little window in the 80s when the copyright laws weren't applying to all the samples they used with the Dust Brothers. One of the greatest albums ever made, if they tried to make it a year later, it would have been illegal.
Oh, wow.
So, 100%. It's one of the most amazing stories about copyright you'll find. And there are so many instances where there are other ways to do this. And so what I think is kind of important is to recognize that copyright itself is a form of mercantilism. Mm-hmm. It's a form of protectionism or rent seeking that really you can come up with other ways to do it that can be free market agreement ways on purchase, with conditions of purchase, not to reuse and so on and so forth, that would really help people flourish in creative markets. But having the government there, and besides, I'm opposed to it because in order to maintain a copyright paradigm, you have to have a court system, which, of course, is based on the state. Mm-hmm. If the state is going to enforce copyright, that means that somebody is going to be forced to pay for that. And I don't want that. Yeah.
That's a valid point. FL Sheepdog says a ban of anything starts black markets, and that is absolutely true. Mr. Rover Pilot tells us about his disgruntled veterans t-shirt, and then Drexus Storm Shadow randomly asked why Sarah Palin always looks permanently surprised. That's an excellent question. And then he said, Benjamin Franklin once said, those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. And that is so pertinent today.
And do you know that he was sued for copyright infringement? No, just kidding.
I was about to have my mind blown. For a split second, you got me.
Pants off, man. It was crazy.
And then he said, starring in the next Spider-Man movie, Gardner Goldsmith as Venom. You started it.
I know. And it's funny. Somebody at MRC TV, somebody commented that I look like that vampire guy from Salem's Lot. I look like a... And right now, just the disembodied head. And it is funny, Nikki, too, just to give people, it's weird as your physicality does stuff. As you know, I've been getting these crazy headaches like once every couple of weeks or once a month or whatever. And it's just out of control. It's so bad. And so right now I've been leaning over a lot. And so I got something in the back of my head that's like super sore. So if people see me rubbing it or whatever, like I said, I'm just trying to get rid of that pain. I would ask for a government grant to handle it, but evidently they're not at that stage yet. I'll just talk to Pelosi. She'll handle it.
I've been going to the black market chiropractor is what I've been doing. He has stayed open for this whole thing, and even at one point, like sent out these emails saying that he would do like home visit, like cash only home visits and stuff. I'm like, that is awesome. Sticking it to the man.
Yeah, it's definitely the more gray and black market you can go, the better. You know.
And Sean Marolf says the Liberty Institute is involved in a lawsuit defending an on-demand publishing house for reproducing out-of-print books because they added an intro to them. They got a fine from Copyright Office for not sending in copies. Oh, that's interesting. And I saw someone else said something about how the copyright law about sending it in applies to self-published books.
Are you kidding
I don't know.
That's insane.
Yeah, I don't know.
There's so many self-published books that are put out, they would never even be able to see them all. I mean, that's like that'd be like something at Terry Gilliam's Brazil. It'd be like Lucy in the Chocolate Shop. It'd just pile up and pile up. It's unmanageable. That's impossible.
Yeah, I mean, that is pretty weird. And I'm thinking about, like, so when I was in, it was undergrad, because I had to do a thesis. I was one of the smart kids in the honors college, so I had to do an undergrad thesis too, and we self-published it, and I don't think we sent a copy to any copyright off. And it was like a big, thick book, like my whole class. Huh.
Yeah. Yeah, I wonder if it's like selective. They must not be able to. Yeah, that's funny. I don't know. I'll have to look into that. That's interesting.
Yeah. Huh. That is interesting. And then Draxus now says the Revers from Blade 2. I think that's another vampire reference. I don't remember Blade 2.
Yeah, I have to check that out.
Man, those are some old movies.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I mean, Wesley it goes Snipes. With the theme, yeah, because wasn't he the one that they were like mad at him for not paying his taxes? Wasn't that
good
him?
On Wesley, man. Absolutely. Screw it. It's like, jeez. It's like, so what are my taxes going to do? They're going to bomb soccer playing kids in friggin' the Middle East. That's what my taxes are going to do? They're going to pay for Maura Healey?
Well, and to, pay the people that are going and shutting down the barbershops.
Yeah.
Or, oh my God, I saw the saddest story out of Michigan. I think it was Michigan recently. Like this old man that had a music shop where he taught music lessons and sold like music and instruments and stuff to kids. And he had to shut down because like he doesn't have money to pay his bills and still pay the rent or whatever for his store, so he just shut down. It was so sad. Ugh.
And on the macro side of the economics of this, Nikki, as you know, and probably 99.9% of the people who are watching us right now. And again, thank you everybody for being here. This is really, really
and staying up so late with us.
Yeah. It's great. And seriously, on a personal level, I'm just. I've been doing stuff for MRC TV and so on, but on the stuff that I've been planning to do, the projects I've been planning to do, I'm just starting to do these in chunks. So it's been really tricky, and I've been pretty productive, but not as productive as I want to be. So I want to really
story of my life.
Yeah. It's crazy. And that was one of the things. One of my friends was like, "Oh, you've been so productive." It's like, well, I've cut out a lot of other things, like. I haven't been dating, going out with girls or anything like that. In fact, one of my friends, if I would go to a bar, he'd like do a cancer charity thing, and I'd go and support, and then I'd leave. And one of the guys was like, "Oh, guard's leaving. Like all the girls are just arriving." And my buddy's like, "Yeah, that's why he's leaving. Like he's leaving because he's going to try to get some work done." Mm-hmm. And I mean, you have to balance it, but right now I'm like. I've got to really focus. I got to really promote liberty and stuff, and the other stuff will come later on. But it's interesting because if you look at the macroeconomics of this, I was watching Bob Murphy with David Henderson, and David's a great guy. Bob's great. David Henderson, economist, and he was the editor of the Fortune Encyclopedia of Economics. He gave me a copy and signed it at an IHS seminar. So. They were talking back in March about what they thought might happen with the economics of this. And what really gets me is if they're going to pump, as anybody knows, if they're going to pump that much money into the economy, at the same time that supply is completely drying up, the prices are going to go through the roof.
Oh my God, yes. Yes.
I can't even, it's crazy. It's absolutely insane. And then, and they think that people like that musician, the teacher, will be helped by some government bailout. It's like,
oh, and now there's the new bill that they're trying to push that would extend like the unemployment for like another, like a year, and give another 2 of those like $1,200 checks. And it's like, oh my God.
If anybody wants to read a great story, pick up, there's a collection by F. Paul Wilson called Aftershocks. I cannot more heartily recommend this collection. It's wonderful. And Paul is such a great guy. He line edited my first novella, Bite. And in fact, he's a character he's not a character, but he's mentioned in a story that was supposed to have been published, but the company got caught in the fires out there, and they're sort of regrouping out in wine country in California. Great guy, a pro-liberty guy as well. That was called Wounds, and that happens around Boston. And it's about a guy who hooks up with a girl whose entire body is tattooed, and she's a tattooist, and the tattoos are very interesting. She starts to put them on him. As they get amorous, she actually does it while they're doing that. But anyway, it's kind of funky. But anyway, Paul is put in there as a little sly reference. But Paul's story Aftershocks, his collection Aftershocks, has in it a story called Aryans and Absinthe, which is set at the end of Weimar Germany.
Oh, wow.
And Paul, oh yeah. And it's great because it's a novella, but it doesn't have chapter breaks. The breaks for the story are citations of the different values for the dollar and the mark. And he goes through. Oh, it's and the monster, or not really a monster, sort of a metaphorical monster in it, is inflation.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, you got to see it. It's like, he nails it. He nails it. It's so good. It's really good. Yeah.
It's funny, actually. Today, it people like they just don't get it. But I saw on Facebook today. I was like, I came out of the kitchen or whatever, and I hear like my husband in the other room like laughing, and I'm like, oh, what is it? What is it? What is it? And he showed me Facebook, and this kid that we know who is like a hardcore socialist was like, I think I'll use my stimulus check to buy a nice new towel because that's all I'll be able to afford with it. And it's like, well, yes, but also how can you say that and still be a socialist? The cognitive dissonance is real.
It's funny, Nikki. One of the nice things that's really come about, and if any of my old students are watching, it's great to. You guys have given me great memories. Great people. I told them very early on when I was in high school, I used to have a teacher who would pull my hair, and almost poured a soda on my head because I would disagree with her on FDR. And I had another teacher.
How dare you?
Oh yeah, it was crazy. Anybody knows me knows I used to have like big like Dr. J afro. I used to hide pencils in it and stuff. Maybe that's why I'm bald now. She used to pull my hair. I don't know, but it was funny. And then I had another teacher who threw me in a closet, and I wasn't doing anything. And she was the math teacher. And I guess she didn't like me. She had my sister, who's a very, very bright person. She's 5 years my elder. And this is when I was in 7th grade. And she must have felt bitter because she got the short straw. She had to teach the health class, for a semester or whatever. So these rooms were triangular in my town, and they had carpeting. And she had one of the typical, I'm going to loaf today. So she put on the slideshow video show thing on the screen. And we're all supposed to be taking notes about something. I don't know what it was. Maybe it was about Cowabunga 19. And, hosted by none other than Gil Bates. Hi, I'm going to tell you about Cowabunga 19 now. So anyway, so it turned out that I was over in the corner trying to take notes, and I'm right-handed. And so I was, when you're right-handed, with these desks with the bar and you get the thing, and it's like, so I'm right near the door and I'm in the first row, and I'm trying to watch this stupid slide thing, and I can't take no, I'm like slow, I'm not doing it quickly. And I was a good student, right? So I was like, oh man. So I took my desk and I slid it on carpeting. Didn't even make a sound, right? Mm-hmm. So I could like point it towards the thing and take notes. She goes, Gardner, get in the closet. That was her punishment. Yeah, she had this little like first grader's desk chair in the closet, and it was dark. It was a walk-in friggin' closet, and she'd make us sit in the closet with the door like open, and of course I would miss everything. So I'm like, what? She goes, you heard me. Get in the closet.
Wow.
I'm like, oh, okay. So, and I was really quiet. I was a really shy guy. I had to work very hard. I made a very concerted effort on how to learn how to be more gregarious so I wouldn't get beaten up and, stuff like that. And so I'm like, oh man, I'm going to do bad now. My mom's going to be upset and stuff. And so I'm sitting in the closet, and I hope I don't get choked up about this one, but I just want to, anybody who knows this guy, who maybe knew me when I was a kid or whatever, or even if you didn't know him, I hope that you'll think about the character of this guy. All of a sudden, I'm in there and I hear this voice, and he goes, what'd you do that for? And I look out, and this kid named Matt Van Cleet is standing in the semi-darkness of this room with all the other students sitting there. And her desk is towards the back. And he was not only the biggest kid in our grade, he was the biggest human being in the school.
Oh, geez.
Matt was a big dude, and he was well known as being the toughest kid. Like nobody messed with Matt Van Cleet. Now, Matt had a circle of people around him who were sort of the troublemaking guys. So he was sort of like the alpha, but he was a good guy. And they were all, pretty much good guys too. They ran around on mini bikes and stuff. Maybe a few years later they were smoking weed or whatever, not my game, but whatever. So, but Matt wasn't a bad guy. Sometimes, he punch you in the shoulder. You saw him in the hallway like, oh my God. But whatever. He's standing there. She goes, sit down, Matt. He goes, I won't sit down. He wasn't doing anything. He was just trying to watch your stupid slideshow. So he knew what I was trying to do, right? He was a few rows behind me or whatever the thing is. So he knew what was going on. And she goes, sit down, Matt, or you'll go to the office. He goes, you can send me to the office for all you want. He was just trying to do the work. And I'm like next to tears. I'm like, I got the toughest kid in school standing up for me against this witch. I was like, this guy, thank you so much, Matt. Wow. Then this other guy, George Haney, stands up, and George was like the next toughest guy. He was a good friend with Matt. He stands up. He goes, he's right. He wasn't doing anything. And so she says, you'll both go to the office. He goes, send us to the office. We don't care. And I was like, this was so cool. It was the ultimate expression of these two guys who might be seen as like the tough troublemaking guys standing up against this authority figure who had done wrong. They were right and she was wrong. And I just sat there. I was like, oh, these guys are great. And a few years later, Matt killed himself.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So that was kind of, but I'll never forget Matt. Yeah, I know. Sometimes I don't tell the second half of the story. Like if I tell it to the students, sometimes I wonder if I should tell them the second part. But it's tough. I know some people who were around the night that Matt killed himself. I guess we were just out of high school. This was probably about five and a half years later. Maybe no more than that, probably 7 years later, because we were in 7th grade. So yeah, it was probably maybe 6 years later. And it was tough. And but I always remember somebody doing a good thing. And that teacher's house used to be on my running route, and I'd always spit towards her driveway and cross the street. I'd be flying like, really fast, listening to The Prodigy or,
something like that. And but you know, I've come to say now you got to forgive her and stuff. But it just goes to show you that. Anyway, I just figured just sort of mention the quality of character of some people that you run into along the way.
Yeah.
You don't know. You think they might be trouble or bad people or whatever, but they got good in them. And so yeah.
I always say that there's, well, I suppose politicians aside, I always say that there aren't really bad people. There's just bad decisions. I mean, there are some people out there that are like probably legitimately evil, but for the most part, I don't think people are bad. There's just people that make bad decisions.
Yeah, and I think also there's a corrupting influence too, where people are willing to hide from themselves the truth of the corruption, and they get uncomfortable when you expose it. And that goes for so many people along so many different political strains and spectrums. Very, patriotic people will say, oh, America strong, defending America, got to stick up for the military. It's like, no, you don't have to stick up for the military. If they're doing bad stuff and they're engaged in things based on people having their money forcibly taken from them, they need to think about that. And I'll give you an example on that too. So I was chatting with Paul Wilson out in, we were in Brighton when my book debuted. And so I was sitting at a table. Paul was there. Heather Graham, the author, terrific lady, terrific. Heather is so great. Tom Monteleone, a writer, Bram Stoker winner, terrific guy. Heather's husband, Dennis. A number of people were at this little restaurant in Brighton, just literally by the coast. And Paul and Heather had been with Harlan Coben and a couple other people on a tour, and they went to Ramstein to see some of the guys who had been burn victims who had come out of the military in the Middle East. And Paul was like, boy, it was bad. It was rough. Now, Paul, anti-war sort of guy. He's not probably full-on voluntarist, but his principles are very, very strong, and he's a terrific person. And so I said, yeah, well, Paul, there's no declared war, of course. He goes, yeah, and he knew. And I was like, they're not supposed to be there. I have spoken with soldiers in airports, and I say, hey, if you do feel uncomfortable about this, you don't have to answer, but let me ask you, are you being shipped off? They're like, yeah. And I was like, you swear an oath to protect and defend the Constitution, right? And they said, yeah. I was like, well, the Constitution requires Congress to declare war if the president is going to lead the troops. The only other way he can lead troops is if the legislature of a state requests that soldiers come in to protect their so-called Republican form of government. That's it. And I don't go into all those details, but I talk about the Declaration of War. And it's like, how do you feel that you took this oath, but you're being deployed in an unconstitutional action? Every one of them. And I've spoken to numerous soldiers. And I've been in a lot of airports, and I've run into these guys. It's always at airports. They're very nice, and they're good guys. You can tell they've got families and stuff like that. And they say, well, I do what they tell me. And I mentioned that to Paul, and he's like, yeah, I know. He said, I know, but you got to understand, Guard, when they get in the military and they're there and they deploy, they're doing this for their buddies. They're there with their buddies, and you can't, it's this bonding. He says, you can't really tear that apart. It's very difficult. So it brings up a lot of very strange feelings. When I grew up, I was a very patriotic guy, learned a lot about the revolution, learned a lot about the Constitution, held these people in very high regard. Then I learned things about George Washington. I played Abraham Lincoln in 4th grade. He recited the Gettysburg Address. I don't know how many times I had to do that. Stovepipe, I was the tall kid, so I had to do it. Yeah, and then you learn about Abraham Lincoln, and you realize, no, he was a pretty corrupt person. He became a dictator. He used the Constitution like toilet paper. He burned that thing. He was not a good man. He was deceptive. And he made more money off of selling land to the government for the Transcontinental Railroad, an unconstitutional act, than he made in his entire career as a lawyer.
Wow.
He was corrupt. Yeah. I mean, it's overt corruption, right? And you say to yourself, gee, having a more balanced view of these things really is important. But I'm not willing to let some of these people slide.
Mm-hmm.
So for politicians, they don't get any slack.
No.
I don't give them any slack. I will forgive them if they want forgiveness later. But if they're going to engage in this, they know better. Many of these people, Schumer, Pelosi, Trump, they should know better. And yes, perhaps the soldiers too should know better. They should recognize the importance of an oath and know what they're swearing about. I try to give them a little more slack, but when it comes to what's been going on in the Middle East and the people who've been harmed, you gotta call them out.
Well, I mean, it's a tough one too, because I know a lot of people, like, it's sort of sold as like, oh, it's this excellent career, and then we're going to take care of you, and we're going to give you this awesome health care, and we're going to pay for your schooling, and you're going to have this great job. And then they sign up, and then it's like, oh, wait, you don't actually get any of those things, but you've just signed like a 4-year contract.
It's you nailed it. I mean, they have all these incentives, and of course, that's the sort of thing they dangle these carrots for the states as well. You've got Title IX. We had a meeting at the school where I was teaching. Yeah, and they had the lawyer there talking about Title IX, and it's like, and your profession, you got to deal with Title IX stuff. It's insane. It's so stupid. And of course, they'll withhold highway funds. Well, that's unconstitutional in the first place. The one thing that I would tell Trump fans is to at least have Donald Trump, or not have him, but tell Donald Trump as much as possible, and all of the supporters, anybody who knows supports Donald Trump, where is this guy in the Bill of Rights? How come he's not actually saying, hey, you know what? The money's unconstitutional in the first place. We're not going to give you any highway funds, Governor Whitmer. We're not going to give you any money, Governor Baker, Charlie Baker. We're not going to give you anything if you continue to do what you're doing, infringing on all these other rights in the Bill of Rights. I mean, come on, it's so simple.
Well, I mean,
bring suit.
There is that theory, that was especially promulgated around JFK and Reagan, and that there's the deep state, and that they're the ones really pulling the strings. So there is that theory.
I should. That's a boy. I'm framing you right now on my computer. Yes, perfect. I got to tell you. There's a really funny bit. This is great. I'm going through Kenmore Square back in college. We were walking from like Store 24, which was erroneously named because it wasn't open 24 hours in Kenmore Square. And you know where I'm talking about, up near Pizza Pad and stuff, and down there. And, we're just under the Citgo sign and stuff. My buddy Steve and I are walking along. And this little kid, oh, man, he must have been from, like, Roxbury or something that. He's walking along with his buddy. And this little black guy, he comes up to me. He's got, like, this puffy jacket. And he goes, wait a minute, man. And I'm like, what? I'm standing next to my buddy Steve. And he goes, hold it. You're perfect. I'm like, yeah? And he goes, perfect for the trash can. And he just goes, and his buddy's laughing. I'm like, oh. And Steve's like, oh, burn. So I put that in the T-Miser. That's how the T-Miser meets his sidekick, who's named Token, by the way. And the name Token for like Token Black Child. I did that before South Park had Token. I did it in 1994.
That was the first thing I thought of too, was South Park.
Yeah, there are all sorts of things that I have in the book that, like, I came up with them in college, and we did like short films, so that it's actually on film, but I didn't get it done quick enough. So it ended up that like some TV people beat me to it. Like you'll see the opening of T-Miser is literally exactly like the opening of Conspiracy Theory with Mel Gibson. It's got a cab driver in it, and I'm like, I wrote that in 1988. Like, whoa, no. But I was like, you know what? I delayed it. I was
it's
like,
the deep state. They've been watching you.
Yeah. So, but it's so funny because on the deep state thing, a buddy of mine from high school. Okay, so I can't really say too much
about this because of deep state stuff. And I'm like, and this is like serious stuff for the viewers out there. Like, I gotta sort of watch myself on this, and this is not like
just so everyone knows.
Yeah.
Neither of us are feeling suicidal if anything happens in the coming weeks.
This is just electrolytes. Yeah, exactly. Not suicidal.
We do not have information about Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, exactly. I love suicidal tendencies, and I love that, but I'm not. Yeah, and no Hillary. Exactly. I'm not going to go canoeing anytime in the future down the Potomac. No. I got together with an old friend of mine, and he had worked. I can't really say places he worked prior to this, but he ended up getting a job in the Obama administration, working in the Justice Department for Eric Holder.
Oh boy!
He left. Yeah, he left very quickly. He was like, "No thanks, I'm out of here."
Mm-hmm.
So a few years after that, it was probably it was when the Ukraine stuff was going down, when the U.S. and anybody who listens to my podcast knows I was reporting on it like as it happened. Everybody knew that the United States was involved with trying to overthrow the government of Ukraine, and that they were trying to overthrow the government of Syria because of the pipeline. They wanted to isolate Russia's energy exports because Russia had decoupled from the dollar. It all had to do with the petrodollar and the amount of money that the Fed had and the government had pumped into the system. $17 trillion starting around 2007, 2008, going through with all the bailouts and stuff, and TARP and all that nonsense. But anyway, so there's a whole domino thing going on there that goes back to Nixon and the Fed, and go back to James Corbett's great video on the creation of the Fed, Century of Your Enslavement. But anyway, so I go to dinner with some old buddies, and he's there, and he's part of the group that organized it. And he pulls me aside, and he goes, "Hey, Gard, where are you getting all your information on that you have doing on your podcast?" And he was sort of implying about Ukraine, that I knew about what was going on, working, the U.S. working with the neo-Nazis and the Burisma stuff, which was just starting at that time. The Soros connections, the funneling of weapons from the whole thing in Benghazi was a weapon smuggling thing, and Seymour Hersh has spoken about that. And of course, he can't get on any of the old popular networks, even though he used to be adored by the left. Pulitzer Prize-winning guy exposing the rat lines and weapons connections and stuff, and Hillary and John Kerry. So he goes, my buddy says, "Where are you getting this information?" I was like, "Well, I'm just researching, and I find it online and stuff." And he goes, "Well, you're right, and there's a lot more."
Wow.
Yeah. And I said, "Yeah, really?" He goes, "Yeah." And he goes, "You know what? I'm not going to say anymore." Now, this is him speaking. And I was like, "Okay." And he goes, "Yeah, I won't say." He's got offspring. So he said, "Yeah, I've got such and such now. I won't say whether it's a boy or girl, or boys or girls or whatever. Offspring." And he goes, "I better not say anything else." So, yeah.
Damn.
It's not good. It's very, very dark. And anybody who's looked at, that circular food stuff that comes from Italy and has cheese and pepperoni on it often, or, the brothers, Tony and what's his, John, and the art collection that Tony has.
Yeah. I just saw a documentary about that one that was going around YouTube, and I was like, what?
Yes, I saw part of that.
Oh, I can't remember the name of it right now.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. And I got to tell you, anybody who's skeptical about this, I came across that completely by accident. I was in the WikiLeaks Hillary Clinton emails and the John you-know-who Esta emails. And I was looking, I put in keyword Libya, and I saw, obviously, in there, I saw the references that Hillary Clinton had towards the fact that they didn't want Gaddafi creating the gold-backed currency. And you know who knew about that? Captain Sensible of the Damned, the guitarist of the Damned, sat next to me and my buddy Jason Osborne one night before we were going to go see the Damned play down in Boston at the Middle East. It's a club. And the captain
I've been there.
Yeah, that's great. So the captain came over before the show. We were having dinner, and he's like, "Oh, can I sit with you?" And I know the captain pretty well now. He's a great guy. And so we sat down and we started talking about Benghazi and, you know, Libya and all that stuff. He knew all about it. He goes, hey, you know what? You know why they took out Gaddafi? I was like, yeah, because of the gold-backed currency he was going to start. He goes, that's exactly right. Nobody knows that. Like Captain, he's more of a left-wing sort of, you know, socialist type guy, but he's got a lot of really good, you know, I just admire him, and the Damned music really helped pull me through workouts and stuff when I was trying to get better. And he's a great guy, really nice guy. And Pinch, their drummer, is a super cool, super nice guy. But anyway, so I was looking at the WikiLeaks stuff, and I had the keywords, and I was calling up these emails, and I kept seeing the so-and-so, Mr. Esta Pod, you know what, Esta. And his emails had all these weird, like code words in there.
Yeah, I remember reading them too and being like, is this guy like doing some weird typos or something? This doesn't make sense. Yeah.
Well, that was my thing was exactly right, Nikki. And I was like, well, that was weird. What's that? It was like supposed to be part of another email. What is that? And then I was like, oh no, it's probably just some like inter-office jokes. Like, you know how some people in an office, they have like taglines that they joke with each other. I was like, oh, it's just that. And then a few days later on YouTube, I started seeing the, you know, Leaning Tower of Gate, right? And I was like, I found out that a week before they had released the emails, WikiLeaks, without any notice, had released the FBI symbols and terms for child predators. And that was what it was. And then I saw those videos and I was like, holy friggin' smoke, man. Whoa. So anybody wants to know why that started, and if they think it's just a put-up job to go after Hillary or the Podestas or anything like that, no. This came from people seeing stuff that was really weird and then logically realizing, oh, this isn't good. And that's all.
Well, that's funny because I mean that was like a conspiracy theory for years.
Yeah, and and of course we know that the CIA tried to promulgate the term conspiracy theory.
Yep.
So that they could discount people and ruin their reputation.
So crazy, so crazy.
Yeah, and by the way, we don't agree on everything, but hats off to Alex Jones and his team and David Knight. That crew, those guys over there, they have stuck with it. And anybody who knows what they've been dealing with, it's unbelievable, the stuff they've been trying to do to those guys.
Oh, I'm sure.
It blows my mind. You know, it's incredible. So yeah, anyway.
Polaris 589 says, RIP everyone listening to this. The government knows our search history. Well, on that note, I guess I'll read the last few like super chats, and then I guess start finishing this up because it's been a while. I gotta go eat some dinner.
Thanks for this. Yeah, I'll grab some.
Rod L. Miller says Speaker Pelosi just had her 3T wish list passed, 199 to 185 with 45 no votes and counting. Okay. Oh God.
That's got a bunch of bad stuff in it too. That's I mean, it's already bad, but
man, we're gonna live in a third world country. Mr. Rover Pilot says, bringing up too many memories for this old Marine, have to leave. Good night. So if you rewatch this later, good night, Mr. Rover Pilot.
Thanks,
Sean Marolf says Elon Musk is saying Americans shouldn't give up their freedom so easily. I'm surprised. Well, good for Elon Musk for like basically suing California to let him like open his plant, and if not being like, well, I'm going to take my business elsewhere.
Yeah,
apparently you just have to be Elon Musk for that to happen.
Banco Jones says, I give you the finger. Yeah, man. If only he hadn't taken some of that government money, I would be like a total booster for Elon Musk. I mean, he seems like a really cool dude. And Joe Rogan seems like a super cool guy and stuff. I know some people who know Joe. He seems, straight up decent dude. And I mean, more hats off if he would just sort of say, hey, I made a mistake taking that money and, sort of work towards that. I'd be like, dude, rock. Yeah.
B. Griffin is saying that the 3T bill hasn't passed the Senate, at least not yet. So here's hoping.
Yeah, there's a question. I think, as far as I know, Mitch, the great principled one, McConnell.
I love to listen to him talk.
Oh,
I love when Ben Shapiro calls him Cocaine Mitch, and I laugh every time.
Cocaine Mitch, that's great. Oh man, yeah. I mean, you listen to the guy; it's going to take years off your life. It's like what was it? Bob and Ray had a skit years ago about the slow talking man. Did you ever hear the slow talking man?
No.
It was an interview, and the interviewer's talking to this guy who's in an organization called and the other guy's like, yeah, National Association of slow talk. It was great. It was hilarious. I from what I've heard, I think McConnell he says it's too much, so it's only gonna be 2.3 trillion.
Oh.
I mean, it's insane. It's
a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation, because on the one hand, the government is essentially taking people's labor without paying for it by making them shut their businesses. So that's the state governments that are doing that. But then at the same time, it's like they're just printing money out of nowhere, and it's other people's taxes anyways.
Yeah, you're nailing it. In fact, it's funny, Nikki, because Bob Murphy made the same exact point with David Henderson, two economists talking back in March in this podcast. And Bob just started his YouTube channel, so I hope people will check it out, Robert Murphy. But yeah, they were talking about it's like, they were mentioning that in a way it is like compensation for taking. And anybody who's familiar with Richard Epstein, and Richard Epstein's really breakthrough book, Takings. He's a University of Chicago law professor, but also very involved with economics and stuff. Basically teaches the economics of law. He said, look, if they're regulating something and causing you to lose money, that's a taking, and you should be compensated for it. And that's a great point. And I think there's a point to be made there. Unfortunately, first of all, they don't have the money.
Right.
Second of all, it's not constitutional. And third, it's going to completely destroy the economy them doing that. It would be better if they just don't do it. They shouldn't do it. And,
I was actually listening to some of Murray Rothbard's lectures the other day, because I was like, I've never actually physically seen videos of him. And he was talking about, it was so pertinent because he was talking about past recessions and how up until the Great Depression, recessions never really lasted that long because the government didn't do anything. And then the Great Depression came along, and then the government was like, let's just throw a bunch of money and regulation at it. And then it lasted forever.
Yeah.
And it's like,
terrible.
Yeah.
And
same situation.
There's another little point too that I'll bring up, and I know this is like epic show tonight. Like, you're just going super strong, Nikki, and you got to get dinner and stuff like that too. So, but I should mention just briefly, one of the things that I think is super important as I move my arms and the camera, pixelates stuff weirdly. I got to get a better camera. Yeah, but one of the things I think is super important to mention is that there is something in constitutional jurisprudence called unconstitutional conditions. Mm-hmm. And so there are a couple examples of this. One is what's called the Cabrini Green case, which happened in Chicago, a place just outside Chicago, I believe. It was a government housing complex called Cabrini Green, where 15, 20 years ago, drug deal gone wrong, saw gunfire, and a child was killed out in the parking lot of this place. So obviously drew a lot of attention. Politicians jumped all over it. And so the officials who ran this government, Section 8 housing place or whatever, they said, okay, look, in order to get an apartment in this place, you are going to have to sign over your right to to unwarranted searches, and we can just go in at any time. So someone sued, I think probably the ACLU probably got on this side of it, which is, nice. I mean, they're not that consistent when it comes to property stuff, Institute for Justice is great. And there are a number of other ones that are very good. But anyway, I think they got on top of this and they took it to court. The Supreme Court ruled against the government and said, no, that is an unconstitutional condition. You can't force someone to give up their Fourth Amendment right, the rights that they have that are protected by the Fourth Amendment, not created by the Fourth Amendment, that are protected by the Fourth Amendment, just so that they can gain entrance to a government-provided thing, just so they can get something from the government. Now, later, the Hillsdale College people and Grove City College, they had a lawsuit that was along similar lines. Strangely enough, I think it was later, the Supreme Court ruled in the exact opposite way. And what was going on was, they were trying to force the colleges to have to conform to Title IX. And they were going to make them have equal number of, exactly, sporting events for women, even though it would not be financially wise for them to do because it was too much expense and they weren't reaping many benefits. There's like, no, you're going to have to do it. These are private colleges, for God's sake, right? I mean, it's freaking crazy. So it's like, look, if you don't want to go here, don't freaking go. I mean, what? Duh, right? So, I mean, that'd be like telling Stephen King, oh, you need to have X number of female characters in your book. And of course, Stephen King wouldn't get the logic of this because he's a hardcore lefty, but he's a nice guy. His son Joe lives out on the seacoast of New Hampshire. He's a nice guy. It's like they're good guys. And I think if you were to sort of make the point to them, like in a nice, easygoing way, they would probably like, you got kind of a point there. But anyway, nobody would tell Stephen King, you have to do this in your book to be fair to men and women, right? Even though, by the way, many women in horror freak out if there isn't enough representation of women in an anthology. I mean, I'll tell you a story about that later. Just absolutely ridiculous. But they don't freak out in the romance novel section, which is dominated 99.9999999% by women. In fact, there's only one man in historical romance who's ever been successful because women can tell if a guy's written it. That is Lee Michaels, Leigh. And he goes by Leigh because it hides the fact that he's a male. So anyway.
Fun fact, I was considering creating a male pen name for my stories, actually.
Yeah. And, it's just the way it works. It's just, I don't blame women or whatever. And, it's just the way the market is. So anyway, so Hillsdale, they get this suit, but the court found against them. And they said, no, if you take federal money, you must conform to Title IX. So Hillsdale said, you know what? We're not, and Grove City, we're not going to take any federal money. And they said, no. Even if you have students who have federal loans.
Oh, wow.
You must conform, which is total tragedy to the commons.
Such a racket.
Yeah, absolutely. So they're like, no, then we're not going to take anybody who has federal loans. They created their own trusts, their own scholarship systems. So now here's the thing, and I'll leave you with this. If you look at the TSA, the TSA is a perfect example of completely unconstitutional. Nothing gives them the right to be there, and also unconstitutional in the regulation of the airways. And I've written a big thing on that I have in my Live Free or Die, the nonfiction book on Live Free or Die, about how the government insinuated itself in control of the air routes, which actually started with the United States Postal Service in the 1920s. When they first started to do transcontinental flights, they set up these lighted air routes because they didn't have radar. And they would watch at night, they'd watch these things through VFR. And then the federal government prohibited the private carriers from using those routes. That's how they got in first. It was through the Postal Service. Friggin' post office. Anyway, so Venom says, so it turns out that if you were to sue on the TSA, you and I know the TSA is a classic example of an unconstitutional condition. The government claims they're giving you something, but what they're actually doing is insinuating themselves between you and the private carrier who should be carrying you only through contract between you guys.
Right.
And they're getting in the way. And then they're demanding a breach of your Fourth Amendment rights, saying you must expose yourself to radiation or our hands. And we can take anything we want from you that we don't want you to have. It's just patently no jurisprudence, completely against the Fourth Amendment, against the Fifth Amendment, against the Sixth Amendment, against the 10th and 9th Amendments and the 14th Amendments. So it's just hands down, indisputable, right? Yep. Nobody could ever argue this, but you know that if that went to the Supreme Court, they would find in favor of the TSA. Mm-hmm. And even though it's unconstitutional conditions, because they're inconsistent. Right. And what's interesting is if people start to recognize this, and they recognize the fact that the federal government operates in deficit all the time, anybody who says, oh yeah, it's perfectly fine for the government to demand things from you if they're giving you something, had better be ready for the government to demand everything from you. Mm-hmm. Because the government can give things to people and does give things to people all the time in so many different ways that they could literally control your life and tell you you will not get your tax refund back. Yep. You won't be able to do X, Y, or Z. Your state won't get highway funds unless everyone in the state is forced to conform to X, Y, or Z, like Real ID. Yeah. It's just, they're all unconstitutional conditions, and yet they do this stuff. So I hope people will keep this stuff in mind, the separation of powers, 10th Amendment. And Mike at the 10th Amendment Center is just phenomenal. I love what he does, at least on the constitutional level. And then maybe, they can start to question some areas and say, well, gee, it really is, even the Constitution is forced on people. And, maybe there's some ways that we could even pare down beyond that. So anyway.
Yeah. It's a possibility. And with that, Draxus Storm Shadow says that he has a rainbow farting unicorn and named it CNN. And then Robert Chappelle says you can still find those airmail guidance arrows out in the desert of Nevada. That's pretty cool.
Oh, whoa, that's cool.
Interesting. Yeah. I'll never be in Nevada, but you never know. Maybe someday I will.
Yeah. I'll ride my unicorn and look for them as they fly.
And on that, I think we'll wrap it up so I can go finish my supper and do all that. Hey. Maybe finish writing a video. We'll see.
Yeah, I'm gonna try to put one out tomorrow and see how it goes and stuff. And Nikki, thank you so much. You are the best. Your designs, everything about your earrings are the coolest. It's just
Etsy
t-shirts. Yeah. And hats off to Mr. Liberty. That's good stuff. And to everybody who was here.
I'm surprised there's still cool. 200 people hanging out.
Whoa! Wow! Hey, I should mention, everybody, if you get a chance, if you can subscribe to the Liberty Conspiracy videos.
Yes, it's linked in the description.
Oh, thank you so much.
Brand spanking new.
Yeah, it's brand new. And the first one's going to be a little bit long because I'm sort of going through some things to try to explain where we stand today. I'm going to do long ones and brief ones. And I'm hoping that each day, or hopefully every day, I'll be able to put out brief overviews of news stories. And they might not even have my face on them. Might just be my voice going through stories. And then at the end of the week, I'm going to try to do sort of something that is like a longer video that explains some of the information from one or two. So, this unconstitutional condition stuff, or, inflationary stuff, the history of the petrodollar, that sort of thing. So we'll see how it goes. So, yeah, and on BitChute, it's Liberty Conspiracy. Mm-hmm. And there you go. And the books are on Amazon. Just look up Gardner Goldsmith. And, by the way, one other thing I should mention. About 6 years ago, I wrote a story called Whitechapel, and that is in Chiral Mad 3, CHIRAL, Chiral Mad 3. Mm-hmm. It's called Whitechapel, and it predicts a lot of what has happened and what will be coming with the pandemic control stuff, including colored armbands that people had to wear, and separation of people and stuff like that. It's a different sort of thing. It's just this thing I call the phenomenon. Yeah, it's in the book, edited by Michael Bailey, who is just a great guy. And so it's Chiral Mad 3 is is it Chiral Mad 3? No, it's Chiral Mad 2 It's Chiromad 2. It's Chiromad 2. Yeah. It's got like a butterfly on the cover, or half a butterfly. You'll see it's mostly dark with a butterfly rainbow.
Oh, cool. I'll check it out.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Disembodied Head says thank you.
And then, yes, everyone go subscribe to his channel. Hopefully it'll inspire me to be a little bit more productive and get videos out more often too.
Yeah, well, you know what else we could do? What else we could do, Nikki, too, is if it comes down to it, and like you're like super busy or I'm super busy or whatever, and you want to, I have some other ideas too. I'll just tell you now. No, I'll tell you off the air the other idea. What we could do potentially is, if you ever want to, and you're like super busy and I'm super busy, as an impetus, we could actually, like send each other the stories and then, hit the stories together as like conversational stuff or whatever, like once a month or whatever. Yeah. However it goes. Yeah. So, and my situation is, right now I still get those headaches and stuff because it seems like I'm being affected by mold. Luckily not black mold. But yeah.
Oh, good. So, okay.
Yeah.
Because that that like kill you?
Yeah, it can destroy the brain. Yeah.
Oh God.
Be very, very bad. This is just I think it's mold, but who knows. But anyway, you just push yourself and overcome it as best you can. So we fight on.
All right, guys. So everyone, thanks for tuning in and hanging out with me and my friend Gardner for almost 3 hours.
Whoa! This is going to take ages to upload. You have to break it, or I don't know. That's nuts.
It's live, so whatever. YouTube will figure it out. People will watch it in the morning.
That's right. Yeah.
Whatever.
That's cool.
All right, everyone. Thanks for hanging out and checking out. Thank you, Tim Allen. This whole time, he's been putting my Patreon and my website and all the stuff in the chat and doing the things that I was supposed to be doing and didn't. But yep, they're all in the description. Check everything out. Thank you for everyone that sent the super chats and hung out for this whole thing. And Gardner's channel is linked down in the description, his brand new channel. And you also have all of the social medias, I think. So
yeah, we got the Twitter, we got the Facebook. Oh, and there's Liberty Conspiracy on Facebook too. They haven't gotten rid of us yet. So if you just look up Liberty Conspiracy, it's over there. Yeah, and Twitter and stuff. And sometimes it gets a little difficult for me. Like if I get one of those headaches, as it wipes me out for like a day, and then the next day it's still like 4 hours just trying to recuperate. And sometimes before the headaches come on, you get like really tired. It's very, very strange. I notice my acuity is not the alacrity of my acuity is my alacrity is not as acute. But hopefully those things are going to go away, or at least be able to get out of the situation. But yeah, if you write to me, I'll try to write back. So yeah.
Cool. All right, everyone. And now is the time where I hit the end broadcast button and then smile awkwardly while I wait for it to actually end.